7:35, and we will call the Region 9 Board of Education meeting for our regular meeting for August to order. And our first item of business is approval of the minutes from our August 5th special meeting. Has everyone reviewed them? Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved by Maureen and seconded by Todd.
Yeah.
Is there any corrections, discussions, additions, or comments on the meeting so aptly prepared by Mr. Hocker? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it's unanimous. That brings us on to item number 3, which is public comment. If there is any member of the public who would like to make a comment at this time, please come to the podium, wave to your friends and family on Channel 78 and YouTube. And
My name is Suzanne Crivet. I live on Black Rock Turnpike in Reading. I want to make a comment about the discussions that are going around in town in various places and venues about the curbing and the curtain in the front of the school. You know that, I may have said this before in another comment I made, but because we don't have a town paper anymore, I think that there's been no opportunity for this board and for people in town to communicate how the decision was made to put the curbing in and the curtain. And because of that, there's people just take the opinion that they have based on driving by. And I have heard people here and there, and my husband has told me, he goes to the transfer station all the time, that the prevailing, opinion is that, people don't think that they don't understand what happened. They think that the school's wasting money and that they would not have voted for it if they had known, okay? And I'm not, that's not a scientific, that's just hearsay. But anyway, I just want to say that, I took it upon myself to write a comment on Facebook, which I hate Facebook, so getting me to do that was like a big deal. But I did it because I felt like there's no place to communicate anymore in the town, and at least I did that. But I don't think that that did anything, and I want to say this to the board, that I think this is a serious problem. That I watched the building project, which is almost 20 years ago now. I watched what it did to the ability of this school to fund things and the difficulties that it had for years because of that. And I watched it overcome over the years for a series of, the budgets and things. I just saw it get better and better. And I was very happy. A few years ago, I kind of thought to myself, this is really over now. The reputation of the region is back to what it should be, like it was before the building project, and now our budget's passing easily and people support things. And I'm very concerned that this misunderstanding, because that's what it is, about the granite is going to deteriorate that. And I just want to say that to the board. I don't really have a solution except to say to you that any way that you can come up with a method to communicate how this decision was made and why it was made, I think would benefit the two towns and this region. And I encourage you to try to find a way to do that.
thank you. Is there any other member of the public that wishes to make a comment at this time? Hearing none, we're on to board member comment. Anyone have a comment they would like to make?
I just want to say thank you, Suzanne, for making the comment on Facebook. I read that comment on Facebook, and I tried myself, as an individual, not on behalf of the board, to share objective information as posted in the minutes, which I did as well. And I do agree with your challenge of communicating, right, accurate information. And I'll just make one comment. I do particularly find I can't speak to the town of Easton, but perhaps Easton has resources, similar resources, but I do find the town of Reading to have a very helpful, objective communication from the town. But that presumes that the town members actually subscribe to the communication, because it's literally just the facts. It's, here's what the minutes were discussed in a public meeting, the referendum vote is X, Y, Z. I find it to be very helpful, and I would encourage, and I also do find what the K through 8 board in Reading has done in terms of, again, it's Facebook, not the ideal journalistic tool, but I do find that what the Reading board decided to do to have that is helpful, if nothing else, just to get information out there. So I just encourage my colleagues to consider some kind of communication of that sort. I'm happy to be able to lead that charge if the board decides to do that.
Thank you. Is there any other board member comments?
You can go in there on that. I thank you also to Suzanne, and I think it's also really important to publicly acknowledge, possibly over and over again, the amount of time that Scott and Paul and Mike have spent bird dogging this project all summer, and making sure that that we were getting everything that we paid for. It's an incredibly large amount of work to be done in a very small period, and I've just been so impressed with the way that the three of them, but also Walter and Gina probably knows the million other people sort of on the ground who are doing it, but the leadership I've seen from the three of them has been just really a gift to our community. So thank you, guys.
I would just echo what Gwen and Cheryl both said, that we have tried to be, and I think we will continue to try to be, to the utmost degree transparent about why we make decisions, when we make them, and how we make them. And I'm confident that anyone who comes and asks sort of thoughtful questions of any board member would find that the decisions that were made were the best decisions that were made under the set of circumstances. And that's it.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we are on to administrative reports. So Scott, did you want to,
With the package that was distributed, there were two budget object summaries, one from the 1819 fiscal year, one from the 1920 fiscal year. In addition, I distributed to you just now the June health insurance analysis report of both Region 9 and for central office. So that would represent a full fiscal year through the end of the 1819 year. I wouldn't typically give really an in-depth financial update at this meeting. The summer tends to be a little bit more consumed, as Glenn mentioned, with some of the summer projects and things like that. So what I'll just mention to you in regards to the budget object summaries that you have is that the 1819 one represents, and the far right column would represent, all of the monies that we are awaiting to close, all of the things that were known expenditures that were set up before the end of the fiscal year but have not yet closed. And typically this is going to be invoices that are due from vendors that are late coming in, or not necessarily late, but just typical for their billing cycle, or things like the electric bill that take some time to come in. And some of them represent board direction that was given on our final board meeting of the 1819 year, which I think was June 26th. It was the Tuesday of the last week of June. So no particular surprises here. Everything is moving along, and this is the mechanical part of closing the financial year out. I'll go through that again in the September board meeting when that should be fully closed at that point. Similarly, for the 1921, this is very much a startup, and we're in the process of encumbering things. The school is in the process of putting in all of the orders for the first half of the year. We set up those things that are known full year expenditures. If we have a contract for something, or for example, oil, our oil this year was actually quite favorable, so we were able to set the budget and prepay that. So we're in fine shape on that line item. That's already been fully expended, as we've already pre-bought that. So those types of things are in process. This shows an unexpended budget of 15,000 out of the total 24 for the district, but that's just an indication really of payroll hasn't been encumbered yet and those types of things. This is very much a startup budget at this point. So we'll start to see that come more into picture, and we'll go into our normal cadence as we get into September for that fiscal year. So that's it on budget object summary, unless there are any questions on either of the two of those. Otherwise, I'd talk about the health insurance. So look at Region 9 first. We had a very favorable June, claims of 169,000 in June. Average claims for the 18-19 year ran at about 190K per month average. That's down about 30K from last year, so a material improvement in terms of monthly average claims from the prior year, and also slightly below our prior 3-year running average. So 18-19 was really our first year with a significant move into the high deductible health plan. About half the total staff was on it. We'll see that number move forward again in the 19-20 year as more people move into the high deductible plan. I think that's certainly a factor, but there's no accounting for also just the reality of the medical needs of the staff. But all in all, a good year, and we finished June with a reserve fund ending balance of $667,000. That's the Region 9 view. The central office view is the second page there. I have been forecasting a negative balance here, and I was anticipating it to be negative 90K, or in that ballpark. It came in at negative 88.8K. So
We're off by 2.
I'm going to work harder on my estimating methodology. I have a whole year to practice. So that's split 3 ways. So just shy of just over 29K would be the Region 9 board's portion to bring this balance back to 0, which will reflect in the next month's, in the July report. That's what I had from a financial standpoint.
That's great, thank you. Do we want to do other administrative reports? Are there any other administrative reports that are,
This month.
because the agenda is a little lengthy. Pager, so. Okay, so we are, thank you, Scott. We are on to item 6, which is discussion, possible action on the campus improvement project update. So I'm going to start, I'm going to dovetail a little bit on Suzanne's comments, and I do realize that we have the challenge of no local paper, and I also refuse to do social media relating to board matters. So I made some slides. I just thought it might be good for members of the community who are, how many hits do we have on YouTube and Cablevision? Hundreds and thousands of residents who watch us at home. So I just thought, it was important to give a little rundown on those items that have been getting residents slightly concerned. So Barlow Campus Improvement Project was designed to address facility infrastructure deficiencies in order to preserve the community assets on the Barlow campus. Our priority has been to provide our student, staff, and town residents a high school complex designed to meet the needs and expectations of the community. And the Region 9 Board considered initial cost, durability, and ongoing maintenance expenses in order to plan this project in the most cost-efficient manner. The cobblestone apron, the granite cobblestone apron, again, the Barlow driveway entrance from Black Rock has been a problematic area for many years. The old asphalt apron was repaved many times, but high traffic volume and the wear and tear from the buses on the sloped apron resulted in continual degradation of the road. This enabled moisture to get under the surface of the road, and then winter freeze and thaw conditions could compromise the road condition and jeopardize the lifespan of the driveway entrance area. I got 2 of those in there. So, The granite cobblestone entrance was designed with a reinforced base to withstand the impact. Stones are projected to last 40 to 50 years. And it's important to note that this apron can remain intact for many years, allowing the district to mill and repave when the road reaches its end of useful life, which in essence means that the apron can stay in place, and rather than do a total reclaim of the driveway, which we did this time, which is ripping everything up, including the base and getting rid of everything, because we have the structure of the granite curbing and we have the integrity of the granite apron, we can virtually just mill down 1.5 inches of the asphalt and repave it, and it would be much cheaper, as you'll see as we move forward. Curbing. The bid package included 2 alternatives for precast and granite curbing. The price difference between the precast concrete and the granite was $74,685. And over the life of the bond, that comes out to about $5,090, and that includes the interest from the bond. So that's per year. It's like $5,000 a year. The board selected the granite based on the lower maintenance cost and the longer lifespan. So again, looking at durability and cost efficiency. Granite curbing also provides greater structure to the roadway, which may increase the longevity of the surface. Now I'm going to bore some people and pique Todd's interest probably, but I did look for data that would give, a life cycle cost comparison between the 2 approaches to the curbing so that everyone could understand. And so this life cycle cost analysis is a procedure where the initial cost, the maintenance requirements, and the lifespan are jointly considered in the evaluation of alternative project designs. The present worth of the initial cost and the future maintenance and replacement costs are considered rather than just the initial cost outlay. So that's, so this slide, you can read it if you want, but basically it details, there's many studies and research done by highway departments, and this one was done by University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Their civil engineering department did a whole analysis on the cost efficiency of granite versus present value, the over time, the in the future to maintenance, and so everyone read this up. If Todd, have you gotten? Okay. So these are looking at precast concrete. The first year the expense is roughly $22 a linear foot, and the present worth again would be $22 a foot. 10 years later, that concrete curbing could be compromised to the point that it needs to be replaced. But in this data point, it's taking, making the assumption that it's still in good condition, and so it puts a net value on it of $28.92. That would be the cost for the granite curbing over that period of time. The granite curbing is $26.50.
I meant the concrete first.
Oh, I said granite, that's concrete, I'm sorry. It says it there, I just speak jumbles. So the first item is the concrete curbing, the second is the granite. And again, if you look at that NPV number, this is taking into account that both curbings are in excellent shape at the end. It's still, roughly $2.50 cheaper to put per foot put in the granite curbing. Again, this just describes how the data is used and how this doctor of engineering put together this study. But I think, what's important is if you look at the last bullet point, and it says many people will pay a higher price for a product that lasts longer. The higher price is obviously paid now to avoid future replacement expense. Implicit in this decision is a discount rate. Today's premium in price is weighted against the discounted future rate expense. So basically what that means is when you get to this additional benefits of the granite curbing, by putting in this granite curbing, the durability and longevity of the road is going to potentially, and this is a conservative number, save the district $100,000 in road prep costs the next time. So when people say, why did you spend the extra money for the granite curbing, the reality is you save them a lot of money by putting the granite curbing in. Yes, there was an initial outlay, but in the long run, the data shows that it's a more cost-efficient way to go. And so the conclusion is that, physical comparison clearly indicates granite is a superior curb material in New England, where winters, road salt, and plowing are tough on Portland cement. The economic analysis, indicates that when the inevitable replacement of the precast concrete is considered, granite curbing is the less expensive curb material. The only advantage of using the precast concrete is the lower initial cost. But this advantage is negated by the granite's durability, longevity, and reusability. So, and I had some references where all this data came from. I apologize for not being the analytical data point guy, but basically there are multiple studies and research is available online that all show that granite curbing in the long run is more cost efficient and the better choice than the concrete. So I just figured I would throw that out there. I don't know if anybody has any questions on the board, but I thought, do I do it or don't I do it? And I just think that it's important that it's out there, so if anybody's watching, they can see it, and I'm happy to have a conversation with anybody and provide them with the full studies and anything that they really want to see. Okay. Moving on from that, Scott, since you're still here, did you want to give us a brief update on the status of the overall campus improvement project and where we are on the timeline? And I know we do have an invoice to approve.
So, taking each of the different projects in order, Barlow Drive we're working with the contractor to get the guardrails installed along there, and then there are a number of punch list items along Barlow Drive that need to be addressed, but it is largely completed at this point. The track at the stadium is in place. There's one remaining piece that needs to be done with it, and that is the line striping. The line striping crew runs a little later than the installation crew. We're anticipating that work to be done over the Labor Day weekend. The concrete plaza in the back, which involves sidewalks, ramp, and stairways, is close to completion at this point. There's some remediation and some punch list items that the contractor needs to work on there. And we're anticipating handrail installation within the next week or so. So each of these projects are in their closing phases, still with some substantial work to do, but the end is very, very much in sight. Turney Road extension down towards the stadium has been repaved. Guardrails will go in there when they go in on Barlow Drive. And lastly, the tennis courts are in heavy duty work at this point. Their anticipated completion date is September 15th, and they're on track to complete that at that point. I would expect to pave that shortly, then the pavement needs to cure for a period of time before the final surface is applied.
Is that granite? Granite, oh.
Somebody asked me if we had marble speed bumps. I got that question. Which, no, we do not have marble speed bumps. Okay. So that being said, who would like to present the invoice.
So I'm passing around
For
the
approval.
summary sheet that we've used before. There's one invoice that has been recommended for approval by the board by the building committee. That is, this invoice, when you receive the updated sheet, I reviewed the sheet with the board the last time we did this, you will see the item that we're going to be talking about pretty much in the middle of the page, and it says pending, the very last column for the board to approve. This is the second invoice from the general contractor, A&J Construction. It is in the amount of $544,155.25. This is their second installment payment. This brings, if approved and upon payment, this would bring them about 2/3 paid out of the total contract cost of $1.6 million. So we still have a third billing to go. As I just mentioned in the update, we're substantially far along in the various projects around campus. We're certainly well more than 2/3 complete, so we're certainly not behind, I guess would be the term, in terms of the money as opposed to the amount of work.
Right. Yeah, I would anticipate we're pretty far ahead of them at this point.
I move that we approve invoice number 2 for a total of $544,155.25 paid to A&J Construction as presented
On the campus improvement plan.
for work on the campus improvement project.
That's what I meant.
Okay, there's a motion and there's a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, it passes unanimously. Thank you.
Before we close this topic, I would raise a recommendation to the board to add an agenda item in regards to capital.
Yes, so we can do that, or, we could do that. Is there committee reports, or there's not? Oh, there is not, so you're, good catch, Scott.
Oh, there's
yes.
board committee, Board of
Is there?
Education Committee reports, number 7, top of the
Okay.
back page.
Okay, so, I don't have a preference, we can add an agenda now, item now, or we can add it when we get the committee reports, either way.
I was planning on doing a committee report, if that's all right.
Okay. Okay, that's fine. So we'll wait till we get to committee reports, Scott. Okay, so we will move on to item B. I know, Scott, you, commitments, you can absolutely,
Thank you.
Oh,
So we are on to item B, which is consideration of the weighted grading policy. And, we had this on our agenda in May, I believe, and the discussion and the board direction was to review the policies in neighboring Durgate districts, including no grading and all of that, and bring the data back to the board.
a-
And so we did this in our committee, a committee with the curriculum committee in June. On June 12th, we met. And so I'll wait for this to go around and,
Thank you, Scott.
So this, as Mike said, in March, we brought this to the Board of Education, this being a proposal to modify policy 6146.1, that the board's instruction and grades. And that policy currently has a equivalent honors or AP grading. But before I get to that, if I could just draw your attention to the second page. You'll see a column that says data from JBHS. This was a request from the curriculum committee to look at exactly how many grades were we looking at. So in other words, the question they asked us was how many grades are actually C pluses, C minuses, or Cs. And then I threw in the data of the D pluses, D minus, and Fs so that you could see the percentage. I changed it into percentage because the grades themselves vary from year to year. The first set of charts are all of the AP courses going back to 14-15. And the second are the honors grades. There was a glitch in PowerSchool that prevented me from getting the data out for the current, the year that just passed. But I could present that to the board at another time if you wanted the current last year's data points. But you could see that we're looking at about 14, 13% average in Cs in the AP level. And when you look at the honors grades, it's a slightly lower frequency of grades that are in the Cs or the D range. I cited an article there for you. There are many, but that article from the New York Times speaks about increasing access. It speaks about the experience of being in an AP course being a benefit, regardless of how a student is doing on a particular test. It does speak a lot about equity, so it's a good resource. So what follows then in all of these other pages that you can look at are the way our neighboring towns give weight to AP and honors. So the first set are all our DERG A schools, and they're all different. In fact, recently, Tom, Stephanie, and Jen Damaris had the opportunity to hear Professor Gusky speak on grading and grade weighting, and it's really eye-opening. We'll be sending some teachers in October to another workshop that he is running. And part of his concern with our grade weighting system, the way we have students play this game of getting into APs and honors courses, has to do with exactly what you're going to see in these pages. It's all over the place. You'll see some districts that give weight to an F, if the F is a high enough F. You'll see some districts that give weight to a course only if the student took an AP exam, then they'll get the weighted credit. Some of these, I tell you, it really reads like an SAT question, and it's in how they do the grade weighting. You'll also get a glimpse at how many levels different systems have. So some of them have many levels, A levels, B levels. I'm looking at Westport, and Staples in Westport is going through something interesting. I gave you a link to an article there. There's a petition from administration there, and they're dealing with the perception in the town and what the unintended consequences might be of printing both the weighted and the unweighted GPA on a transcript. At Barlow right now, we only present the weighted GPA. But as I was speaking with the curriculum committee, looking at the way we grade and the way we give weight to grades is something that the staff may be taking up. Definitely we will take up if the board would like us to, in really overhauling our grading. We're entering that conversation now in our curriculum work with assessment models, that not every assessment needs to count for a point on a student's transcript. Students can learn a lot from formative work. Not every assessment needs to be 2 hours long. So grading is very complicated. But what you're looking at that follows the Wilton. Wilton is the only school system that does not weight grades. They didn't get rid of their grade weighting. They never entered it. So in speaking to the people at Wilton, they speak about, well, on the transcript, it reflects that it was an AP level, so they don't give weighted grades. I pulled other comparisons just so that you'd have some other information. Courses that have different grade weight, so if it was an honors, an AP course, or a UConn credit course, that might receive more weight than just a regular honors course. I pulled the districts that we normally would compare ourselves to that are either geographically similar or close to us. I think it's Pomperaug that wins prize for the SAT. The Region 15 is Pomperaug, and that just reads like an SAT question. They even give you a sample of your grade
Calculation.
weighting. Isn't it great?
Yep.
So they give you the process. So it was very eye-opening to me, and I appreciated the opportunity to dig into how schools tackle this. What we are proposing is something a little cleaner, which is just giving the grade weight to a C minus. The rationale being, if the students are earning a C minus in an AP or an honors course, they are completing the work in that course. And if we're going to give weight to the A's and the B's, then it seems more equitable to give them to students that are earning a C minus. We didn't have interest at this point in extending that down to the D range, but just to stop there.
So,
Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Actually, if I could add one more point too, one of the things that the board asked the committee to address at the time we talked about this was the ability to expand it to all cohorts. I believe, Gina, correct me if I'm wrong, we do have the ability to do that.
Yes.
So while the initial proposal that the board considered months ago was just the freshman cohort, it would apply to all, or it could apply to all.
And thank you for bringing that up. It could apply to all, but we wouldn't be able to do this year. So in other words, we were talking about phasing in, starting with the class of 2023 and phasing that in. But we wouldn't be able to start it this year because the push from Power School has already been made to the teacher grade books, and that calculation of grade weighting is based on the current policy, not based on any revision we might consider. So if we wanted to move forward with this, it would go
next
into
year
effect
anyway.
for everyone for the next school year.
right.
And how late could you wait?
It would probably have to be before the summer. That's when that work starts. Once the 1 year closes and then the new schedule is built, that final push normally comes the end of July, beginning of August. And then once that's done, there's not a way to take, and Gail Persico is our amazing data processor and Power School guru, but there's not a way to take it back, fix it, and then push it out again. The only way to do it at that point would be to have every teacher do a calculation on their personal grade book. And then, and we just, that is a little spooky when you're talking about students' grades and transcripts. It's possible, if it's something the board feels very strongly with, we can have every teacher meet with data processing and adjust their grade books. But
I'm
our
not sure that complies
idea
with state statute anyway.
is to the state statute.
I'm not sure that you can do, I think state statute says that each school district is required to have a weighted grade policy that's clearly articulated, for lack of a better way, in your student handbook at the beginning of the year, so that when students are taking courses, they can make decisions based upon what you tell them that policy is. I don't think you can not have it in the beginning and then just kind of have teachers readjust it then. I don't think that would be.
And whether it's statutory or not, it's certainly cleaner to just.
Well,
I agree.
Without a doubt,
I
I don't
agree.
think it's an option to put it in the middle of the, but,
Well, I'm wondering, and this isn't a fully formed opinion, but I'm wondering, the reason I asked the question is that, there are members of this board who will not be on the board starting in December 2019. So, and not to kick the can down the road, it's just, I'm wondering as a matter of sort of fairness, whether we should reserve this for the next board.
There would sort of be a retroactive recalibration of everything? If
No,
that-
it would be the grade going forward.
So, for example, there's a junior class presently, and this policy were implemented at the conclusion of the year. Then that junior class going into its senior year would have none of its former grades recalibrated, all of them recalibrated? How would that work for that hypothetical.
It wouldn't recalibrate anything.
Anything.
That was our concern.
Okay.
Initially, we thought we'd have to roll it into the freshman year and then each cohort. But once the grades are stored, that weighted GPA stays there.
Okay.
And it doesn't touch it. It only will touch the current.
So you're only gonna start with the freshman class?
No, we could do it with everyone, but if you were a junior who had weighted grades and you maybe earned a C in an AP course, it's not going to go back now and give you weight for that junior year. It
Okay.
will only give you weight for the senior year. But we could do it all 4 grades at once. We wouldn't have to roll it year by year.
Understood. And the second question that I have here is, briefly taking a look at this, it appears that most schools, with the exception of Wilton, do weigh for AP and honors classes C grades.
Yes,
I didn't see any that did not.
you're the only ones, right?
Okay.
Right, so, I have a few questions too. Anybody? So, yeah, so just to follow up on what Maureen just said, I did look at that as well, and while all do give added weight to Cs, Westport gives a C at 2.67. Okay, they're not giving Bs for Cs. You know, if you look at many of these, I circled another one, so yeah, Weston, you know, again, a C minus is a 2.7, you know, they're not making them Bs. They're giving you some added weight because of the rigor of the class, but they're not bumping a whole grade level, you know, a whole grade.
Weston, Mike, does look like
Correct.
a whole one, from CP to
No,
AP?
so Weston is C plus, and AP is 3.3. Honors is 3.0, and a college prep is a 2.3.
A 3.0 would be like a B, right?
Correct, but,
On a 4-point scale.
On a 4-point
yeah,
scale.
yeah. But, so, and again, you know, I just, a C minus is a 2.7, is that a, you know, that's not a
Like a C
B
plus.
minus, right? That's, so I guess my concerns still relate to what is the objective of this? And I think that my concern is for our students that what we're saying is, gee, we want to let you have the opportunity to take a more rigorous course because we think that's in your best class, or you're hesitant to take that class because of the possibility that you may get a C and it's going to ruin your transcript. But the reality is that colleges throw out all this weighting stuff anyway. They know, so the student may feel as though I didn't get a C, I got a B, but when the college looks at your transcript, you did in fact get a C. And that's a difficult thing. The other part of it is that, so we don't use weighted grading for honor roll. And so I'm wondering how that conflicts with what we're saying here. So if we're saying you've done the work, so you should get that added weighting, but now you don't make honor roll because you haven't done that much. You know, I struggle with these things. I struggle with our diplomas of distinction because diplomas of distinction give students who take the basic regimen of classes and get good grades a diploma of distinction, but a student who takes a rigorous schedule and struggles in a class does not receive a diploma of distinction, which again seems a little conflicting to me. It's got to be one way or it's another. What message are we giving to our students? It seems to me like we're trying to, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're trying to increase the numbers of some of these classes by enticing students to believe that they're getting extra weighting to their grade, which is going to not affect their GPA and going to encourage more students to take classes. And I think that's kind of a flawed way of looking at it. I think you end up where you have AP classes where there are, unfortunately, some students who just don't belong in the class, and they will struggle, and it will impede the progress of the other students. I know there's that old philosophy that the more advanced students will help pick up the students that aren't, as advanced, and I wish that were true, but I have not seen that to be the case, especially in some of these high-level courses. And I like I say, I struggle with this, and I look at what other schools are doing, and I've done a lot of reading, different articles online as well, and from, I know Tom didn't like my article last time, was from Kaplan, and he said they're just trying to sell tutoring, but there's ones here from, NEA, there's ones from College Board, there's a lot of data out there that says that we're going away from being able to use GPA as a valid indicator of a student's readiness for college. And now colleges are going through this test optional kind of model, which makes it even more difficult to be able to determine the readiness of a student. And the last thing that I will say is that I'm also wondering why we have said in the past, we feel very strongly that if a student takes an AP class, that they should take that AP test. And I can understand that, but I have gone back and looked at some of our AP test results. And I'm wondering whether you're setting a child up for the harsh reality when they get a C- in the class, they get a B- on the report card, and they get a 2 or a 3 on their AP exam. And what does the college say when they look at that? Do they say, well, here's a student that challenged themselves and we're going to give them, due credit for that? Or do they say, here's a student that in the class probably didn't belong in there? And so that's where I kind of struggle with the approach. I like the idea of giving, more merit towards more difficult classes and having some sort of something that denotes that a class is a higher level of rigor. But I think we're really setting students up for that harsh reality that when time comes for them to apply to college, that they're going to find that colleges do not see it the way we're telling them they're going to see it.
So, if I could, when we've spoken with Paula about the colleges and the transcripts, what colleges want to see is that the students, whether you're weighing GPA or not, they want to see that students are taking the most rigorous courses that you offer. So we've done that research in the fact that we don't offer APs to our sophomore students. Does that harm our college admission process? And the answer is no, because no one has access to grade 10. So you can't take, unless you came in and you had an AP in 9th grade or 10th grade in another school, that's not in the Barlow profile. So what we're told by college admissions people, and Paula and her department, they've gone out many places to ask these questions directly. Colleges are looking for the most rigorous course. You're right, Mike, they're not so focused on the grades and the GPA because that gets changed anyway. A B doesn't appear on their report card. It's just the grade weight behind the scene. So if they received a C in the course, they're earning a C on the report card. This doesn't mask or hide anything. It's just making their weighted GPA reflective of the fact that they earn that C in an AP or an honors course.
But Paula has said in the past, and most articles that you read, all the college recalculate. They all recalculate the GPA. So
But we don't know how. I think that's the salient point. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. Maybe they say they recalculate it, maybe they use things as cutoffs. we don't necessarily know, nor is anyone gonna undertake the analysis to see how everyone from Yukon to Salve Regina or wherever recalibrates. It's not gonna be uniform across schools, and what I get concerned about is that when a school has, 10,000 applications to plow through, that they use a numerical cutoff blanketly, even though they don't say so, to just cull the herd, to say, okay, well, if our average student that's coming out of Fairfield County, Durg A, whatever Durg you use, has a 4.1 GPA for this school, well, we're not gonna look at the person who has a 3.7. We're gonna cull them out. And for that reason, it's important for me to have us consistent with the other schools around us.
But it doesn't
Right,
look
but
like
we're
any,
inflating.
and Gina said, there's little consistency in this. So let me say, from school to school, you said Pomperog was,
There's
an
little
essay.
consistency in the way they do it. The one thing that is consistent
Consistent
is that they
That they
do.
Do
Right,
it, right.
okay, so let me ask you a question. I'm a regular student, I get an A, right? In a regular course, college prep course, you give me a what?
4.0.
Chris gets a C. In a regular college prep course, what do you give him?
It depends on the level C, but you could use a 2.0 if you wanted to.
Okay, so then if it's on a 5-point scale and I get a 5, right, for an A, Chris would get
Same thing.
a 2.5. Do you understand what so on a 4-point scale, a C typically comes in as 2, which is half of an A, right? On a 5-point scale, half of an A would be at 2.5. We're at a 3.0.
Correct.
So to me, that's inconsistent. If we look at our normal scores on here, we go, and to be fair to students, if you go from an A down to an A minus, you lose 0.3 points. But the difference between an A minus and a B plus is 0.4 points. So you're not really being fair and consistent between those junctures. And nobody's doing these by hand anymore. There's no reason we can't take it out to 2 decimal points. And that makes it even a little more fair because you're typically breaking it up in thirds, so why wouldn't you use 0.33? That's just the math teacher in me, right? You should, everything should be consistent, and that's what I don't see here. What you're proposing stops at a C, so D doesn't get it, so that's not consistent either. So you're now punishing the Ds, and you're helping the Cs. And you're not doing it consistently, because we keep doing you raise it up from a 4.0 to a 4.3, and then you bump it up to a 4.7. So you're undercutting the 4.3, and you're giving that undercut up to the person who got the one higher grade that they can get. And I don't think that's fair.
I don't follow you. It's just a 1 point increase between the differential.
Yes, but
Exactly
when
the
you're
same
talking
increment.
about a grade point average, that 1 point can make a big difference in terms of where you place against somebody else. You're up above or you're below, and it's not true. So if you want to be fair, I think you should try to work to be fair straight across the board, and a C should be the middle of the range. That's the definition. C is middle of the range. If you're a 6-point range, the C should be a 3. If you're a 5-point range, a C should be a 2, or a 2.5, excuse me. And if you're using a 4-point scale, it should be a 2. That's what seems consistent to me. So I don't understand how we got the proposed weightings here. I'm not a big fan of, I don't think there should be any weighting, because the colleges all reweight.
We did discuss.
They do, but they have their own, and every college may do it a different way. But all we do by changing and having our unique pattern is we make our school a little harder to weight against somebody else's school because they're all different scales. So go, if you're gonna do that, at least be simple and plain so that there's no little inconsistencies, and it makes it easier for a college when they're actually going through and reweighting not to make those mistakes. So,
I still don't follow the logic, but I get your point about I think I understand it, but I guess one thing that we did discuss as a committee was that we agreed that there's very little appetite among the committee to explore the no weighting at all. And the one school that Gina laid out was Wilton, right? They don't have grading, they never have. So there would be no level of introduction of change that we'd have to introduce to the families and the parents, et cetera. And just to be clear, we did contemplate those options. We contemplated what the administration originally proposed, all grade weighting, no grade weighting, et cetera. So we looked at 4 different scenarios. As a committee, we excluded no grade weighting because, again, the backlash to it's probably not something that we would want to take on, to be frank.
okay.
And then and again, we only have one example, right? And so from all grade weighting, that's why we included the number of students if we were to do that, how many students would get impacted. Me personally, I'm agnostic to whether or not we go down to D or F or C. I get the qualitative factor, but I also get the math factor. It's all or nothing, right?
Right.
But it's inconsequential. Like if you look at the numbers of students, they're not a lot. So, and I don't know that would change by people feeling encouraged to enroll in an honors class because the weighting changed. I think at the end of the day, I'll remember something that I think Gina or Jen or Julie had said. A D is a D. Kids have to try really hard to get a D. But the kids really work hard. I know kids who stuck with courses in contrast to the example that Mike had cited. They stay and they stick with the C, even though it's going to hit their GPA. So to me, more than anything else, to Maureen's point, I'm with advancing something because if nothing else, it's equity. It's equity against those we're being compared against, and we're being penalized. And I don't want to get stuck in the minutia of how we do it or punt it because we've been talking about this for 8 months.
Right.
Oh, so I just to
She hasn't had this
respond,
for you.
I think that there are several decisions here, weight or not weight, okay? And I'm on the not weight side, but I can take your point, and I understand that, and so that's fine if you make that decision. So now we're in the, say, weighted area. Well, if you're going to do weighting, it bothers me, it should bother you as well, as an accountant, that the numbers don't add up, and it's all done by computer. I don't know why we can't go by .33 increments, because you're given that .03 to the person who got the grade higher. And I know you say that it's inconsequential to you, but I'll tell you, and Paul would tell you, if you're in front of a student, those extra little points here and there, they will fight tooth and nail for every extra little point on their grade point average. It's really important to them.
Fair.
So it should be fair. It should be, if you're starting at a 5 and you're lifting it up, a C should be getting a 2.5. And I mean, that just seems plain and simple to me. And I have a difficult concept, or a difficult time understanding the concept of having different weightings like that. And I guess Mike had said, essentially you're given a C, a B. You're giving them a B on a 4-point scale, but you're giving them over a C on a 5-point scale. And so I can accept the weighting option. What I struggle then is the actual number ratings. And you should go all the way down to a D minus.
Yeah, 2 points. Yeah, first of all, I'm not advocating that we kick the can down the road. I think you make a good point. We have, worked on this. Next point is that by these numbers on page 2, particularly in the AP, to me, 12-15% of the kids is a big enough number to care about. And, just, if it were 1 or 2, like you see in the Ds, it's like, okay, that's a rounding error. 12, 15 is not a rounding error. So, I think we should do something about it. And 3, as a non-math teacher guy person, I actually think I do understand Paul's logic. And wonder if perhaps there's a midway point, if what we're doing is focusing on the C minus through C plus, because proportionally, if you go from a 2 to a 3, that's a bigger proportion than if you're going from a 3 to a 4, right? That's my understanding of that. You're the math teacher, but I think I'm right. So, is there a number, as Paul suggests, that instead of taking it up a full 1.0, you take it up a 0.5, for instance, in that C,
In that C range.
in the C range?
do you feel
So,
about that,
that's
Gina?
kind of a split the baby approach, but it's not, it helps to address Paul's point, while still, to some extent, addressing the 12 to 15% who, I think could use a little encouragement.
Yeah.
Gwen?
I'm with Paul. Also philosophically, I wish that none of these schools have weighted grading, because I think that it's like shopping for a mattress. Like, you can see the same mattress at Macy's and another store, but they're labeled differently, but they might be exactly the same. But you don't know, because there's really no, and I think that's what colleges are probably looking at when they look at 4 students with comparable transcripts from comparable good schools. And so I think that the whole weighted thing across the board is not helpful to anybody. However, I do take the point that I don't, want our kids to suffer because everybody else is doing something that I don't agree with. Paul's math point also makes a lot of sense to me. Regarding the point of kicking it down the road, based on what Gina has said, I don't know if there's an implementation difference in whether we approved this tonight or whether we approved it in January after we have a new board, if it wouldn't be implemented until the following school year. I don't want to see this happening like in June where you're scrambling, but I think Chris makes a valid point about new members coming on. I think Paul has added something important to the mix about the math consideration, and so that's my 2 cents on the timing. I don't think that there's a practical impact if we delayed it to that point.
I'd like to hear Gina's response. Do you think that there's a practical impact if this is a delayed decision?
I don't. I think what I would feel comfortable with is, because we can't implement it now, maybe it goes back to committee with exploring, the grade weighting there was approved in 2000, June of 2000, sorry, Sheriff. June of 2000 was that grade weighting. And maybe if that is something the committee wants to look at variations to what that would look like, that would touch the entire grade weighting system, we can do that. Again, the whole point in this was to be equitable, to have access, because the other thing that was uncovered, as I wrote in here and spoke to last time, the grade weighting system that we have that's so unique, that doesn't give weight to a C or lower, was intended as a gatekeeper. It was intended to say, there are students that have got it, and there are students that don't got it. And if you got it, then be in this class. There were other criteria to be in AP courses, down to, you probably have a longer span here, but in another district, it was IQ points would allow you into an AP and have access. So philosophically, we've moved away from there, and I think importantly so. So we believe that our teachers are amazing. We believe that and you can see from the grades, they work with the students, and these students that are getting the C's are working very, very hard. So if we're going to have grade weighting, we want it reflect an access instead of a barrier, and that really is the reason for bringing it forward. We'll continue to rework it. I don't have a problem with doing that, with your permission to go back to the original, whomever came up with our initial grade weighting system, and looking at what that would be if it was more mathematical. I see what they did, right? They took a 4, a 3, and a 2, and then they did a C minus and a C plus, and then they did a B minus and a B plus, and then they repeated it. So,
Rounded.
Quick and
they
dirty.
rounded and they, yeah.
Well, you can't avoid rounding.
Right.
But now when it's being done by computer, you really
Yeah.
care whether it goes out to 3 decimals? I mean, not
And if you
really.
look at Westport's great, they do give the decimals, they go out 2 decimal places when you look at
In the
Westport.
consideration for not going all the way down, because as I look at all the other schools, they go.
It all
below.
goes straight down.
They go all the way down to
They'll go to F.
F and don't wait on that. I'm the only one that doesn't do that from
And
all
that's
these examples.
beekeeping as well, right?
So I don't know if we're going back and looking at that, is that something we
It's
consider?
also, as a
or what was the
practical matter,
logic?
it's just one notch up from immaterial, whether you give it to DNF or not.
Well,
Yeah, and I'm also a fan of not doing the weighting. I mean,
Yeah.
this is crazy. I appreciate this data, because I look at Pomperaug, and they give an example of a unweighted 3-3, and when they weight it, it goes to a 6-1.
Right,
I mean, that's just crazy. What does that mean? I mean,
yeah.
it's not a real indicator of anything.
This is also another
So
thing the
it's
public
crazy.
might wanna
I
weigh.
totally appreciate it. As I look through this, there is no rhyme or reason across any of these, which, except for Wilton, which doesn't weight, which, again, I personally am in favor of doing that, but I know we probably won't get that to pass. So I would appreciate looking back at the C range, and then, again, if there was some logic why we didn't go below that, if we're gonna go back and look at it, maybe to reconsider and looking at that as well, if we're trying to be equitable with the surrounding towns.
Another sample, if you look at Ridgefield, it's just another way to do the GPA. They just add a 1.0 bonus to whatever you have, and that might be a way to say if you're in AP,
right.
you just have a 1.0, and that might, and then a 0.5. So we can run through different,
We really should,
it's
come
an
up with
important conversation, yeah.
an overall strategy because it just seems like there's so many conflicting points in our grading system that don't, so, I mean, Gina said that colleges look for the most rigorous courses on your transcript, which is true, but it's not true. They want to see that you have the most rigorous classes that you can handle, because it's certainly not true that colleges want to see you take 5 APs and get Cs in all of them. And you can go back historically and look at that, I'm sure that the data will show you that that's not true. And the other problem that we have is, like, when you look at a school like Ridgefield, and they do not require that you take the AP test. So if you are a C student in the AP class and you get a B on your report card, when you apply to college, they don't know that you would have got a 2 on the AP exam, okay? What's concerning to me is if you look at our AP scores, and they are, so, 2016, 38.7% were 3s or below. In 2017, 40% were 3s or below. In 2018, we're up to 41% are 3s and below. It seems like, we only have 60% of the kids that are getting 4s and 5s, and we have 40% of the kids that are getting 3s, 2s, and 1s. And again, a student having the opportunity to take a college-level class and challenge themselves is a good idea, but are we enticing them by the grade, I don't want to say grade inflation, everybody doesn't like that, but it is, but by increasing the grades, are we enticing students to over-challenge themselves? There is a pattern here that we have very few students that take, 3, 4 AP classes in their junior and senior years. We used to get a lot of that. Now, students have come to the revelation that really all you need is 2. If you really want to challenge yourself, maybe 3, but virtually nobody takes 4 APs anymore, because there is so much workload and demand on you to get through those classes. And so I think the last point that I will make is that the greatest factor for colleges is class rank. And so class rank is more important to most colleges than GPA or even test scores. They look at class rank. And so when you're doing this, you're affecting the class ranks, you're encouraging, and I think you're kind of conflating those GPAs, and I think that might hurt the reputation of Barlow in the long run for our high degree of rigor that students are given that, benefit of the doubt when they come from here, that we have such a high level of academic excellence. But I think that if we progress to where we give higher grades to more students, we're going to go from 40% threes and below on APs to 50%. And then what do colleges look at when they say, well, 50% of Barlow students in the APs get threes or below? Are we still looked at in the same way, in that same regard?
Well, so I think that you're going to give the curriculum committee more work, because we are, all of us, speaking as though we're experts in college admission processes. MIT and Harvard and the top 50 schools in the country, any way you want to measure it, could take nothing but 4.0s. And they don't, because they're looking for all kinds of things. I think we know what we can go ask, what are you looking for? I think we care about equity here. We care about fairness, and I think, feel this is not, the way we have been doing it is not fair. I think we're wrestling with a legacy that's decades old, and the older it is, the easier it is. We're going to put lots of barriers between teenagers and the most advanced courses to try to keep them out. That was what we were doing in the 80s, 90s, and before. And even if the kid persisted and showed up, then the AP teachers in the first couple of weeks would just say, I'm going to shake out the riffraff. I'm going to give so much work. I'm going to frighten kids. The strong will survive. So if we want to sort kids by talent, by innate ability and the kind of household they're coming out of and all kinds of things, we can do that. But we've evolved from there. We've said we want kids to reach and stretch. I do think we should look at why aren't kids taking the fourth or fifth AP course. That's a good conversation. I think we think the kids that are, and maybe I'm colored by having spent 10 years across the ridge, but kids that are taking 14 AP courses by the time they graduate are paying too great a price emotionally and physically. And here's your 14 4s and 5s and your prescription for your eating disorder. I think we got to balance all that. At the end of the day, I think what we have is it's not any of those things, right? It is weighted, but it's not. It's intended to incentivize, but it doesn't. So it's good that you're having this conversation. At the root of it to me is the degree of difficulty of AP greater than honors, and is the degree of difficulty of AP and honors greater than college prep? Right, let's go back to 1981 when I was at Ridgefield High School. Not allowed, by the way, to take a single advanced placement course because it would have been too difficult for me and or I had not exhibited appropriateness. So I am ashamed to tell you, I'm running your school system without a single AP in my high school career. I know, and you can evaluate me later. I'm probably out of a job.
I didn't take one either.
I do think that that you're having a good conversation, but it's just going to go around in a circle.
I agree.
Should the degree of difficulty be reflected in some way? Is it okay, and I think it is, for colleges to say, of the 250 kids that you graduated, of the 300, of the 197, of the 157 kids, is this kid in the top quartile in your ranking? Because we're not telling the kids what their rank is, so
Right.
really the only people that get to know it are well,
Just don't know the
They-
ranking of this.
unless a scholarship says to us, we're going to grant a scholarship to a kid that's got something, the counselor will handle that. So I think, let's get more clear on what the colleges are looking for. let's think about not, is this mildly less intelligent kid who's going to get a C in this class holding everybody else back, and we should keep him away or her away? Or is that kid demonstrating other virtues that we like? As you guys are all having this conversation, I'm thinking of the post-college transcript, where when we're looking at people who have taken molecular biology or engineering or advanced physics, and you're going to see some really fine teachers, and there's going to be some C's in there because you get to the university, and are they grading on a curve, or is it just a really difficult class? Or if you're getting a C plus in one of the really technical courses, you might be thrilled by that. We're all over the place. To me, if I got a 79.2 and Julie got an 81.2, she got a 1.4 bump, and I want to address that. I think you correctly brought to the surface, in the olden days, we went 073, 073. Is there a more equitable way to rate it? But I think, unless you want to argue about this, preparing and teaching and participating in and being a student in an AP course is just way more time commitment and honors and AP. We've now at a point where, unless you have special needs, practically every kid that we're putting through the program is taking the full college prep program here. But in the late 70s, early 80s, it was about 50% of kids, right? Good old Ridgefield High had advanced placement, honors, college prep, academic, general, basic, and below basic. And you could get through, I would say of the 450 kids in my graduating class, probably 200 of them didn't take the full academic course, college prep. So when we've really changed that, we're unless you are in our special needs program, you probably are, right? It's probably in the 90+ percentages. So I love it when you get excited about this stuff. I think what you can infer is that history in each district has taken this in a different direction, and you've got to decide, is it fair to Jen, who took AP U.S. history, who's slugging her way through with her 77, and or not, and then so let's take it back to committee.
It's okay. I guess not to make this more complicated, since I'm the one who wants to get this through, is you mentioned that the administration, thank you, Maureen, the administration is looking at overall grading, like how much do assignments, I mean, is it even worth punting to when that discussion is completed, or when will that be completed? Is that realistic?
That's
a one
big
long punt.
discussion.
That has been going on for,
Well, that's
Okay.
that's a large part of my focus right now at every level, and will be a focus of the curriculum steering committee K through 12. Really looking at what does mastery entail, and how does that translate to a grade. So what feedback do we give to students, and how engaged are students in that process, so they also understand, am I getting an A because I turned in all my homework on time, and I scored well in tests, et cetera, or is the grade really just that I'm a well-behaved student who shows up to every class, et cetera. And depending on the grade level and the course, the grades mean very different things. So this is one conversation of many that we could have about grading.
I think I'm hearing from the administration that there is still a desire to move this forward, if nothing else, to address a short-term equity parity question, right? So I think that's clear. But from the board perspective, knowing that we will have 2 new board members, as a board, do we even want the committee to have this discussion again prior to the new next year?
I think we do. The people on the committee that have the discussion are not people who would be new to the board. So we would be advancing what came out of committee to the remainder of the board as that subcommittee is currently constituted. So.
Okay.
And there's
will change.
You can keep working on it, and there's no issue with that. One thing that I will throw in just in the end is that, so AP classes are typically graded on your ability to perform on tests that cover the content of what's going to be on the AP exam. So, and that's
of
the
their
reality, that's the reality. And so,
I would never do
it would be just as easy for a teacher to say, well, Tom is working hard in the class. Right now, he's not getting the content enough that he would get a 4 or a 5 on the AP, but he's doing his homework, he's bringing in his assignments, he's doing things the right way. And so I could just as easily give you a B minus instead of a C plus, but the way that grade is tied in, it's tied into the content of that course based on that exam. And so what I'm wondering is when we're going to alter that and make you feel that somehow your grade is better than it's going to be, again, on that AP exam, I'm struggling with how that is good for the student.
It works in the other direction, too. I can think of a kid who the teacher said, you know, this kid is not performing up to potential, and came back with a 5 on the AP, and the parent said, change my kid's grades to straight A's. And the teacher said, that wouldn't be right either. So Julie Gavoni, who used to be our music teacher here, she once said, all music comes from 8 notes with sharps and flats. And she goes, think of it. We understand a lot about music from that. So we have a 5-letter cultural thing that we call A, B, C, D, F. And A means take your kid out for ice cream, and F means something critical happened. But when we try to balance this big issue that Stephanie's trying to wrestle with, is this grade an indicator of your knowledge and skill as acquired and retained over time? Or is it more than that? And is it because of all the other factors of you being in the class? Dr. Gusky says, you know, most people feel like 80% a B-ish, that's okay, we can feel good about it. Then goes, what if I gave your crossing guard a B because 80% of the kids made it across the street? You know, it's such a tangle. We want to be in a position to say to the world, to the collegiate world, we're sending you a Barlow A, a Barlow B, a Barlow C. The teachers are holding a line that is part quantifiable, part experiential. This kid deserves a C, this kid deserves a B. I am not going to make that C into a B. I'm also not going to make an A into a 5, a B into a 4 on the test. A C is a predictor of a 3. But I am going to say your C is something you earned, and it deserves a weight, or nobody deserves a weight.
And the college, I just want to add some information. The College Board is changing its philosophy on test taking. So anyone enrolled in a course now is expected to take the test. And they are putting a financial impetus to coerce students to take the test at the end of the course. So if a student is taking a full year course this year, they have to sign up for the test by November 15th. If they do not take the test, there will be a $40 fine for canceling their order. And they've done all these studies, and the belief is, the data says, according to the College Board, that if students are required to take the test at the end of the course, their performance throughout the course is far superior than not. So I just want to throw that out there because our discussion of weighted grades kind of expanded to a discussion of many topics. I just want to make sure there's accurate information being shared as well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to item C, which is the right sizing plan for projected enrollment decline. This is an agenda item that we have brought up the last 3 years in August. And so I know we had the bake a cake discussion last year, and so hopefully it's at least in the oven or something, but I'm interested to hear the progress that we've made on the right sizing plan, because as we head into budget season, it will have an impact, so.
Boy, we are having a lot of issues with the, with this. All right, I am going to just hand these around. I think you could see the screen, but just if you wanted a hard copy, and these will be posted on the website as well. So what I'd like to walk you through is our visible thinking in how we're going about this task to, we call it right size Barlow, right sizing given our reduced enrollment. This presentation used to be called this, which was visible thinking when making decisions about right sizing given reduced enrollment while keeping values and the portrait of the graduate in focus. And that will be very familiar to some of you board members who were on the Budget Committee and the Curriculum Committee on May 28th. A version of this was presented. This is a little bit shorter version, but the committees that heard the full presentation can definitely add to that. And based on their input, we were able to update some of the slides and some of the information that I want to share with you today. So the objectives here is really an appreciation of the work that we're doing, on understanding, as Mike just set this up, that this work and our budget planning go hand in hand, hence the joint meeting of the Curriculum and the Budget Committee. And the reality that we want to make any cuts and reductions in a very thoughtful, visible way. We don't address in this presentation fixed costs, so that could be something different. I know that Scott has worked with the Budget Committee on what's the projection there and where can savings be. And there's not, except in a couple of cases, there's not really a mathematical timeline. I'm not going to say in the year 2025 will be reduced by 11 teachers or something. What I really want to take you through is this framework that we're using to make those decisions. In the interest of time, you know our expectations, what we're looking for in our Barlow graduates. This slide was presented in a different way to the committee, and it was a little confusing. This is, if the committee remembers, the original one was that bar graph, and we had different lines going on. But what you see here is starting, and the board has had this information in many different forms over the course of years. But what you see in this summary slide is beginning with the 13-14 school year, we looked at an enrollment of 1,068 students. I chose that year because starting in that year, we continued to decline. So what you see in the first column is the enrollment. These are October 1 enrollment dates. All of this information is available on EdSite, and those are the numbers we're using. I put a star or 2 stars next to the 860. At this moment, that's the enrollment here at Barlow. We won't know our enrollment at Barlow until October 1st, and then the real enrollment will go up. And as the board knows, when we talk about enrollment numbers, it's what's in Power School, who's in front of you, versus what was that October 1. And then anything that goes out from there are the Prouda predictions in enrollment. So that second column gives a decline from the previous year. The third column is that total decline of, one of the students taught me about the pointer here. So when you look at this column, this is the total decline from 2013-2014. So since 2013-2014, you could see that we are down 208 students. We wanted to break up the reduction in FTEs between certified and non-certified. So the board has received many reports, and you know that as we reduced by one academic teacher, we may have added a special education teacher when we, for example, when we started the 3E program. We had to add a teacher at one point to deal with one specific student's personal needs. We've reduced by non-certified staff. We may have reduced a para, but then we added a BT, so really the net gain is 0. So what you're seeing here are just the nets of our reductions in certified staff and non-certified staff. So as we're down 208 students, we're down 15.3 positions, and that includes certified and non-certified. 11.8 certified and 3.5 non-certified.
Maybe
When you
moving
move-
forward when we do that, because that number, when we say 11.3 certified staff.
11.8, yes.
8, I'm looking at it and I'm looking at the one next to it. But that is not 11.8 teachers.
It's pieces of certified staff, it's teachers. Certified,
It's not only teachers, is it? Are we sure it's all teachers? It
It's
doesn't include
administrators, it's
administrators?
anybody
Plus
certified.
the one dean.
And others,
and a
the
dean, right?
and,
So
you know,
we've
so
had one dean, yes.
I think it would be easier for us to be able to see the reduction in staff and the areas of reduction, so that we can kind of
I
better
could present that
understand it.
again.
It's
We-
hard when you see 11.8, the impression is that we've reduced the teaching staff by 11.8 teachers, and we have not, correct?
10.8 teachers. The one position there is the dean, was the administrator. The other certified teachers are certified teachers. The counselor was actually non-certified. That was the PAM, the drug and alcohol substance abuse counselor was
Okay.
non-certified. So the others are certified
Okay.
teachers, right.
Yeah,
And
at
we,
some
and
point,
I will
breaking it down
continue
more would be
to
better.
update, that might be something we put on the agenda, and continue to keep that list updated. It's helped with people on the board who have been here a while. There was one presentation where we put the names of people. That was very helpful, because it gets a little tricky when you're trying to figure out who is working where. But that is so 15.3 FTEs. But this is what we really wanted to share with you, which is our framework for making these decisions. And it's good that you mentioned the dean, because that's one of the examples that I wanted to go through. So we look at these 5 areas when we're making decisions to right-size or reduce the staff, and at what point was it the right time. 15.3 is a lot of positions. The school, I think, has functioned very well, and part of that is because we made those decisions at the right time. So when I talk about safety, when we talk about safety, we're looking at supervising students. We're looking at materials and equipment. We're looking at safety from the physical, emotional, and academic framework. This is just our general framework. With legal and graduation requirements, we have to look at the state mandates. Tom every year gives us lists of, and shares with the board what responsibilities we are accountable for from the state. We look at equity, we look at civil rights acts. We know we have a 50-credit graduation requirement beginning with our current freshmen, the class of 2023. We have to make sure we can meet those requirements. We look at our mission of the Barlow graduate. We look at consequences, good and bad consequences. What are the unintended consequences? What are the comparisons in our DIRG? What do our test scores look like? The climate of the school. And then finally, that constitutes a dollar amount. So once we go through that framework, what is the dollar amount that we are looking at? So how does that framework work? That's that next slide that shows you this framework in action when we made the decision to reduce the dean director of student activities. We had 1 fewer adults to monitor the hallways, but we again knew projection-wise our projection was going down. We took those responsibilities and we assigned them to the assistant principals and to security, and we recategorized a secretary's position who was able to do more of that managerial work and paperwork for the student activities piece. So, or legally, we knew we could meet the requirements, or we'd have to have told you that we were going to be out of compliance, but we knew we could meet the requirements. We believe we maintained our portrait of the graduate because we kept our student activities program intact. We use the restorative model. That's been really used with fidelity as Jen and Julie have taken over those discipline aspects of the dean. But we did lose something, right? We lost an administrative assistant that assisted the assistant principals, because that person's responsibilities became that student activities manager. Because our assistant principals pick up all of that discipline piece, it's reduced their ability to be instructional leaders. But the financial impact was worth those consequences, and it saved us $155,000 when we made that decision. We bring the board athletic teams for reduction, and this is the framework that Mike uses and he'll continue to use. And later on in some of the, in a later slide, I'll give you what to expect in our budget presentation. But these are the things Mike looks at. So he looks at reducing levels before he eliminates teams. He looks at co-opting teams. You saw that with hockey this year. He keeps an eye on the feeder program, so just like we keep an eye on enrollment, he's looking at the feeder program coming through. He again is looking at the physical, emotional, and academic safety of the students, so he's reduced assistant coaches in the past because he hasn't needed those extra bodies on the field. And then we could do a team of one, which could be a consideration going forward, especially with our gymnastics team. He has a different set of legal requirements, so he needs to, again, look at state mandates and equity. He also has to be very sensitive to Title IX, to CIAC regulations, and then to our collegial athletes and what are the regulations going on there. You can see when you start looking at that consequence column, I think it's important to say, okay, the climate of the school, but if these reductions are done at the right time, you really minimize the negative consequences in that. Mike is very sensitive to the community and community support, as Paul has been, when we bring forward any reductions in the athletic area. It's a very emotional piece, and we need to make sure that we're being very visible in our thinking so that people understand, our voters understand, and the board understands why we're suggesting reductions here. We also now have to take into account as we reduce, if we reduce athletic teams or levels of teams, that reduces participation fees as well, so we need to keep that in mind. This is a little bit more concrete example of how this can work. So again, this is our framework, and if we push this framework out through the counseling program, the reason it works a little cleaner when you look at counseling is that we're looking at caseloads. And so it's different from an academic teacher who maybe is teaching different courses at different semesters and has different certifications. It muddies it a little bit. Where a counselor caseload is set, so you would think at a certain point you could reduce by a counselor. When we look at that certain point, we look at the year of 2022 and 2023, because based on the Prouda projections, if we reduced it that year, our caseloads would be about 170 students, and we could still keep a reduced load for our director, because that's what we have right now. If we reduced sooner, so if we came next year and we said, you know what, show us without a counselor what that would look like, caseloads would be in the 190s based on our projection, which would mean that our director of counseling would need to pick up some of the caseload, which could then lead to what you see going on in the consequences and as we've thought this out. So if you reduce a counselor at the right time, you mitigate some of those negative consequences. We need to keep in mind all of our legal requirements in our counseling program. We know if it was too soon, right now, one of the things our director of counseling does, instead of maintaining a full caseload, is she coordinates all of the 504 meetings. We couldn't have her stay in that position. We'd need to juggle that and figure out how to do it if you didn't reduce at the right time. You look at the DERG A comparisons, they're not in the 190s, and so that would be a concern. Our director of counseling also helps coordinate the testing. Jen is the head Pumbaa of it all, and then the director of counseling assists in supervising some of that. And the savings would be approximately $101,000.
For salary.
For salary, right.
There'd
That's
be
yes,
insurance and other.
insurance, right. So when you're looking at, 101 is actually the loaded, but for the junior counselor there in the department. The academic programming, how do we make that decision there? This is where I can't give an exact date and say in 2022, 2023, we can reduce by X teachers. I can tell you we will be reduced. I just wouldn't be able to be as clear as we might all like in that financial impact, because we're constrained with things like class size. If we require students to take online courses, it's something Scott and I had a conversation, we'd have to pay for that. So if we required it, so we would have to figure that in. We'd still need to make sure that all of our students met that 50 credit requirement. We'd be concerned that right now in our mission or vision, we value student choice. We let them pick the courses that interest them. That may be limited if we reduce staff too soon. If class size gets too large, it would compromise the depth of feedback as we're looking at what our teachers are able to do in the classroom. We'd need to look at students taking that academic course, and we would have to make sure that it was a little more prescriptive when you look at consequences, limiting the path to accommodate student interest changes. Right now, we can accommodate that if students change their mind to a certain extent. It gets a little tougher. And then the dollar amount would vary. So we shared this with the joint boards, and this is what I really wanted to take time a little bit to update. These were some ideas or thoughts we were exploring in May, and it's only been a few months, but I do want to get into a little bit more depth as we were asked questions by the joint boards in what this means and what this looked like. So the first piece is very interesting, and it really builds flexibility. This is encouraging the cross-endorsement of teaching certifications. You may recall I spoke about this last year. The state has made it easier for certified teachers to obtain cross-endorsements without having to go back and get another master's degree in a particular area. So I gave you just a couple of examples. We have a math teacher right now who has physics certification. We have a French teacher who has English certification. We have certified teachers that are able to teach courses like computer apps or passages. So those are, it gives us a lot of flexibility when we're looking at potential reductions in staff, and I'll explain that in a moment. We were looking at credit to advisory for the senior passages or mastery credit, and what we'll be piloting this year is the developmental counseling curriculum, working with 9th grade students during that science study hall. It's an interesting way to find time, and I'm interested to see how it's going to work, and we'll keep the Board of Ed Curriculum Committee updated on that. But we're wondering if that's still a way to earn credit, and once we make that decision, that would have to go through the curriculum committee, and we would have to build the curriculum for that, or at least revise the developmental counseling curriculum to accommodate that. The school schedule, we haven't done much since May. It's ongoing. We have moved forward with the Math Center, and we're looking at this for personalized and online coursework. Right now, the Math Center will be open 2 days out of the cycle. It's being staffed by teachers who would be on duty somewhere else. So we are just putting those teachers on duty in the math center. The math department has done just an incredible job putting together resources, using Khan Academy and little video links. And so we're very excited to see how this works. This could end up in an ask in our 2021 school year if we're going to move this forward. But it's way too soon for me to say that because it hasn't even opened for a first day yet. In technology, I really just listed those ISTE standards. I know the board is interested in hearing a full report from Chris Angel at some point of our technology and what we're doing as a ER9 tech committee that Stephanie oversees, but also our budget, our Barlow technology committee that looks at our in-house, how we're using technology. We are going to, as much as it pains me to put in that bullet and put something under it, but we are going to have to look at succession planning for our administrator for special education. And so what will that look like? Will there be a cost savings? There may or may not be. These are different scenarios that we'll continue to run through with central office. The dual enrollment college partnerships, we're very pleased through the Community Asset Network. We have connected with Sacred Heart, and there's some nice opportunities there for some partnerships, dual enrollment opportunities for our students. Our connections with Palooza, having the community members came in and gave feedback to our students in their capstone or senior project. I'd encourage all of you to participate this year. It really is a wonderful opportunity. Summer Academy offerings for possible credit, we haven't touched that. We'll have to look at that as an option. The rotation of course offerings, again, to limit the singleton courses. So what this looks like for this year is we didn't offer 9th grade humanities. There weren't enough students to warrant it. And by not offering it, we were able to have a lot more flexibility with our 9th grade schedules and avoided some of those schedule conflicts that we had come to you last year to talk to you about. So we'll continue to look at that. It doesn't necessarily save money. As you know, we spoke with the curriculum committee early on about not offering AP chemistry one year because it was a singleton course with a few students. So we channeled those students into other places. The following year, we had to offer 2 sections of AP Chem. So it didn't really save anything in the short term, but it gave us a lot more schedule, a lot more ability to schedule people. Something you will hear more from us is combining levels. So we are carefully looking at this option and what impact it will have on our budget requests going forward. So as we use the math center, maybe we can look at our math levels, and we know math has many levels. One of the areas we're looking at seriously is the calculus course, and maybe directing students into AP Calculus. Again, there are many schools in our DIRG that don't even offer calculus. You take AP Calc, or you can go into stats or computers or something there. So something we are looking at. We will have to have a ongoing conversation, as we have been, about Latin. If we're going to continue our Latin program, then we really want to explore an entry level for students in Easton or students in Reading who may be affected by their staffing, where the students in grades 6 and 7 may not be able to continue in Latin, and it gets very complicated, but that's the feeder program. So we'll have to think about that seriously. Should we be focusing on that and looking at the way we categorize Latin? Should we be offering a Latin 1-2 combined, a Latin 2-3, a Latin 3-4? Again, it wouldn't have budgetary impact unless the board says that's not where we need to put our limited resources. We need to put them someplace else. So that's something to look at. So that leads us to this new slide, the 2021 budget presentation and things that you could expect to hear. So we will most likely bring you a funding request for the bridge service. This is a service delivery model. If the data continues to support this model, we will need to find a better way to fund it than the way we're doing it now. Looking at funding for the math tutor, if we're really going to build a math center that parallels the writing center, then we would want it open, perhaps if the data supports it, more than 2 days a week. Do we make a parallel structure and have a math tutor like we have a writing tutor? When we look at the reduction in athletic teams, as our numbers drop again, can we really support all of the teams that we have? Freshman-based basketball is our only freshman sport, so when we go through that framework, that would be something we would have to look at. Mike is already doing that work in looking at gymnastics and doing teams of one, co-opting teams where he can. That's working out very well. The hockey team was a great success, and we'll continue that co-op opportunity. We will probably be exploring, again, using that framework, the reductions by full-time positions. So this is an important one. Because we have the cross endorsements, we would rather reduce a full position than continue to take tenths of positions. We know right now we have 5 different departments that have part-time teachers, .8s in English, in Latin, in French, and in social studies. We have a .6 in wellness. The .6 in wellness is fine. That person is fine working less. The .8s, we think we will lose them if we go to a .6. I'd rather lose the whole .8 position and fill in with our cross-endorsed teachers than take another 2/10 and make a .6. Part of that struggle is you lose a teacher at a .6 because they're marketable and they could go somewhere else, and the ability for us to hire a .6 may cost us more because we would get very experienced teachers, maybe retired teachers. They might come in higher on a pay scale. So we are, it's nice to have those cross-endorsed areas so that you could take a French teacher who has an English certification and give that person an English course so that it's still a full-time position. And we're not, and we have a full-time French and a .8 French teacher. We do believe that we'll be coming forward with security staff reduction. Our thinking behind that is that using that framework, we have an SRO in the building who's working out very well. If you want a presentation at some point on the SRO and how that's working with supervising students. We know we have our own building security. We're getting we're using technology. The camera upgrade is amazing and a big time saver. We know we have enrollment decline. Our building right now is locked everywhere except that front entrance, so people are directed there. We will have an electronic sign-in system. So next year could be the year that it would be the right time. If we would have reduced security before, I don't think we could come and be as confident saying we can keep the building secure and only have 2 security personnel. So we'll see as the year goes on, and again, as we bring these ideas to our full budget meeting, but it's just some things for you to think about. And then these are just some questions that we'll continue to talk about in the budget committee and the curriculum committee, because eventually the board is going to have to weigh in on some of these issues. So we know right now we have 5 credits for wellness. The state only requires 4. Do we reduce that? That's a bigger picture question. Should courses be offered if enrollment is less than a certain number? And what would the rationale for that number be? That's a conversation we'd love to engage you in. Are some programs, are some programs non-negotiable? So we would offer them regardless of numbers, right? So like that AP, BC calculus, our highest math level. Would we get to the point where we would run the course if there were only 7? It's a robust number this year. I'm forgetting the number, it's late. But it's not 7, it's much more than that. And so we're excited about that. But what would that sequence look like? Is changing the sequence of courses something we should do? And then what's our philosophy as we phase out programs? So again, those are conversations that we can have at the committee level that will eventually come out of committee and use the full board to take a look at. And that is what I have to share with you.
Questions for Gina? None? Really?
Mike, if it helps you, I can give you the breakdown of the 11 point, whatever the number
Eight
was.
positions.
11.8, if you'd like it now, because Gina has.
Thank you, I
kept it.
couldn't get to it.
So while
in
you were
one
doing
time.
that, I brought it up if you want me to read through them.
Sure.
Do you want to know the position?
So English has been reduced by 1.2, math by 1 FTE, science by 2 full-time teachers, social studies by 1.2, world language 1.4, wellness the 0.4, and art/technology 1.6, plus the dean, plus 2 librarians.
2 librarians, we forgot our librarians.
So it's 8.8 teachers plus an administrator plus 2 librarians.
Have we hired any other teachers or any other
So what
positions?
that doesn't account for are, there were special education pluses and minuses through, so there were years where
Are we up or down in total number?
I think it's net zero. Because they're not on our list, and I was doing it over on the side as well, saying this teacher's position was eliminated, but we hired a 3E teacher. So maybe there was, a special educator that was working with other programs, but.
Could you tell me world language again?
World language was 1.4. You're welcome.
So we're down roughly 8 core teachers and
So
one
when you,
sixth art teacher.
right, so if you look at the board has a document, it's from March 6th, and it gives you the pluses and the minuses of when we added teachers and what they were. So in 2016, 2017, we added 3 teachers. That's the year we reduced the dean, the Spanish, the math, the art, social studies, English. We reduced special ed, and a secretary in the library. So the net was 5. We lost 5 positions. We added 3, that was added 3 teachers and lost 8. So we had a net of 5. And you have this document, if you'd like me to send it to you again, I will, but this is the one that has the teacher names, so it's a little easier to follow. You may have seen it that way. It also has the teacher names, and this broke it up where special education was on a different side, so that you could see the additions in special education and the reductions in other positions. And that includes, for example, we were reduced by, we added a BT, and we reduced a para. So it's kind of a net in, as far as the certified staff. We just moved a para into that. So this is probably a more accurate one.
And Mike, I just confirmed, there were 3 special education teachers whose positions were eliminated, but then we added 3 different special education certified positions over those years. So it is a net 0 for special education.
And you will recall on September 25th, that is where, I don't know if that's the document you're looking at, Julie, but on September 25th, that was the information, again, using that EdState portal that showed the FTEs in general ed and special ed. This does not show the support staff information in this document.
Thank you. Again, I think at some point we have to move away from, or progress from, this is how we're thinking and would do it, to this is what the plan is. And because, I don't know, when you go back, if you go back a couple slides, there's that one slide about, from the board, what the board would have to decide. And I struggle with that because if we were to make these decisions, should we have Latin, should we do this, should we do that? Many of us feel, and the members of the public will say, well then, that's the role of the staff and the administrators to make recommendations as to how you feel we're serving the best interest of the students, right? Now, our role is slightly different in that we have to we have to balance your philosophy and plan with what we feel the town's abilities to pay are, and try to find that, way to continue to provide what it is that we value, as we get smaller, and that's the challenge. But I guess, from my perspective, I'm just looking for greater direction as to how we're getting there. I feel like it's an easier route to say today that Mike is actually going to put forward the suggestion that we're going to reduce freshman basketball, rather than say it's something that we may consider that's coming up, and maybe the board's gonna have to decide whether or not they wanna cut freshman basketball, So, I guess, we talked about a rotation of courses and stuff like that, and I know you're doing that to some degree, but it would be helpful to me to see a document that shows this is the way the rotation is going over these years, so that not only do we know, but our students know and parents know, what that rotation is, rather than figuring that out as we get, closer to budget season. I just think that would be kind of helpful. I mean, I do appreciate that you have a philosophy for how to move forward, but I just feel like at some point we need to roll that into an actual plan. Because, again, I think we're in a challenging spot that as we get smaller, can we ask the towns to pay $30 million for 750 students, Maybe we have to. Maybe that's just the reality of it. But I think it's better to know that with some lead time than to, try to cross that bridge when it's, we need to come up with a budget in 3 weeks. I think that makes it more challenging. So, Chris, yes?
Yeah, I'm just going to kind of disagree to some extent with what you just said. Let's face it, if we really want to know how everything's going to look, within some parameters over the next 3 years, then we have to let go of this idea that our programs are primarily driven by, or to a great extent, driven by student choice. And we have these conversations, that we could impose a structure that says we're going to have between 21.2 and 26.3 kids in each class, and we're going to offer this program of studies. And when the numbers go from X to X minus 20, the framework is just going to be shrunk, but it's going to be the same kind of grid pattern. And that's just the way it is. And I would hate to see that. Okay? But what I find interesting is that I can remember like 3 board conversations along this line, and I don't hear anyone willing to say, either, Chris, you're full of it, that's not the way it needs to work. So that's one way you can put it. Or have someone say, yes, indeed, you're right, and that's where we should go. And just change the whole philosophy of how we're doing things. Because if you want more predictability, particularly, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out, as we go by the prouder projections and accepting that those projections probably for 2 or 3 years are pretty good, you can make that happen. You really can. The question is whether you want to make it happen that way, which I don't think we should, but I mean, you could have a board decision that says, no, we want the predictability. That's what we want. We want to be able to tell the taxpayers that year 2024, 25, that it's going to look this way and within some, band, it's going to cost this much. I mean, we could do that. And if we want to direct the administration, no, show us, this is what we want it to look like now, go make this work. We could do that. I don't think anybody's willing to do that.
So I'm I won't disagree with you, but I'm not going to agree with you. I'm right in the middle, which is basically, we may be forced with making a decision as to whether or not we value value a variety of student options more than we value retaining certain programs, because we might get to that point. We can certainly say what we would hope to be able to do. That's great, but that might not be the reality. And at some point, we're gonna have to make a choice as to, maybe we can't offer 3 options in English
But
to
as
students,
long-
that we're gonna offer 2
as long
so
as
that
we're
we can
gonna-
retain something else.
As long as we're going to talk in terms of might be, could be, and maybes, then you can't at the same time say, okay, tell us what it's going to look like. All right? It doesn't work. You can't have both.
But shouldn't they have a recommendation as to what their professional opinion is? How it, in other words, I think it's more valuable to the students to have 3 choices of English than to be able to be offered Latin. Why is that a board decision? Why does that come down to, we look at it and say, gee, we need to cut, 80 grand, so, well, it's either Latin or it's the English class, I don't think that's where we should be. I think that should come from
I don't want to put words in your
administration.
mouth, but that comes awfully close to, we're the finance board, they're the professional educators, so they bring us the program.
No,
and then we decide whether the tax-
they bring us their recommendations,
the
that's
board-
what
I
they're
think-
supposed to do.
I understand that, but I think the board has a role in that, which is what that slide says.
So, as you guys are talking, I have 2 metaphors I gotta give you, and the later the day goes, the more metaphors you get from me. One is, my longstanding desire to own my own Jeep, and I can't, because I don't control our money at home. But I often, if a Jeep's for sale on the side of the road, I'm gonna take a look at it, and what you see is, 3,500 OBO. And when you see OBO, you're not paying 3,500. Right, because they're saying, we want something in this neighborhood, and so I think there could be some good clarification for the administrators, because what they feel is that if they say, well, it could be this, the board will go, okay, go for that. I think that they mean if they say, here's a range of options, this one would cost you the least, that the board would go, oh, well, obviously that's the one we're going to go to. Now, I've told them, that's not the board's primary response, but it is something we have to alleviate. I think it would be great to clarify the sphere of decision-making, but historically, this board has been very eager to be the decision-maker. You just spent an hour on the professional recommendation to extend the weighted grading down to a C. You said, go study it some more. I'm also concerned about, we keep giving what I'm going to call consultative work to the administrators who are running the school. And I know you're frustrated, and I acknowledge that, and I want to own some of that. You have been asking for this for a couple of years, but I look at the time and energy budget of these people, and I'm going to say to them, take more time to work on this. So we need a kind of a work order, a clarification of what we want. I think we should be saying, we want to look down the road with you. Let's look at what's likely to be the increasing cost of special education. How does that impact this modeling we're going to do? If we hear clearly from the Board of Ed, administrative team, come in and make a recommendation, then to what degree can they know when they make a recommendation, the board will adopt it? Because they don't want to come in and say, we looked at this, we looked at that, this is what we think you should do, and have the board go, no, don't do that, go study it some more. So I think we need to get clear on that. I do think the board needs to know what the financial prospectus looks like, and that's where I find it very difficult for us as your administrators to try to find that. I think there's more that you could ask the town board of finance, the town officials, to say to us, this is what our net grant projections are over this period of time. These are the other projects that we need to account for. This is what we think the cost of the municipal government's going to run, the cost of K-8s, and that leaves us this much, you know. But when I start saying that, they go, wait a minute, if we calculated and told you, administrators, what we think we could afford in taxes, you're going to go for the highest amount. So we got this group going, we don't want you guys going for the lowest, and we got the other group going, we don't want you guys going for the highest. But there is something in the middle there. So what these guys need is a clear statement of why we need to know this in advance of when we can actually do it.
So,
And that I think there should be a liaison from the board assigned to continue this work with the administrators so we can sound out some ideas. Because we do think there's some decision points that the board would have to make for us. The biggest one, as you raised, is do we not build the master schedule until after the kids have made their course selections, or do we build a static master schedule and we fit kids in, and if you don't get what you want, you don't get what you want? That's what keeps pushing us all the way back to February, March, at which point you guys go, we didn't even see this budget till February, we got to put it in bed in 6 weeks. Give us the staffing document, and they're going, I can't give you this. Like, so there's all these things built in that we'd have to, you know, negotiate out how to do it. I do think the board needs to have a view down the road. When we have 700 kids, what would it look like? What they're going to say is, whatever modeling you do isn't going to be a straight line.
Right.
So there's a lot, that's why there's a lot of conversation in this presentation.
but it gets, I look at it a little differently. So we have a couple of, to use your term, buckets. We have maintenance on the building. The building is always getting older, and so it is going to cost more and more money to fix and maintain the building. And that doesn't matter whether we have 1,000 or 700 kids. You know, cleaning the floors and stuff, maybe you're going to use a little more paper towels or, you know, toilet paper, things like that. But that's fairly incidental. Special ed, as another bucket, is taking a larger and larger portion, and that trend seems to be going. Then you have non-academic things, sports, debate, you know, things like that, play. And then you have the academic, or that area, and that would include administrators as well as teachers. And so that pool is getting smaller and smaller as that they have to spend on that. It's getting smaller and smaller. And as the citizens see the number of students decrease, they're looking to see the budget decrease. And so that's the area that you have to do it from. And I see the thing, and I'll harp on it again, I see the athletic program is going to lose another team. And I understand that because the population's getting smaller. But that's not saving you a whole lot of money. That program, most of the costs in that program are all the people who run it. It's the trainer, it's the director, and I'm not saying we should get rid of them. You have to have them regardless of how many teams you're running. So it comes down to the academic area. And then, Tom, you mentioned, and it's happened for the last 6 years, we come to it, we can't get our numbers, we can't do anything because we don't have the projections, we don't have the enrollment, we don't have any of that. That's the thing that has to change. And if we don't change that, It's gonna be the same problem every year, and so we have to stop it. And I agree with Chris, I don't wanna do it. I think it's a good way to run the school, to have the kids pick some of the things they want. But just like Tom said, you know, he wants the Jeep, he's not getting it. So he's gotta make adjustments for his lifestyle. We'd like to run where the students get all the choice in terms of the courses they want. We can no longer afford it. So I appreciate all the things that went into this presentation, but frankly, I saw a lot of, we could do this, we're looking into this, we could do this, and it's the same things I've heard for the last 6 years. We need to start saying, here's the choice, you do this or do that. And it comes down to the main decision being, is it student choice, or do we have to restrict that? We can't offer, just throwing out a number, 20 AP classes or elective classes when we have 1,500 students, and then when you go down to 750, you're gonna still have those 15 or 20, whatever, AP classes, electives. You just can't do it. So something has to give. And rotating is one of the options, and you're probably gonna have to do that to maintain the diversity of choices. But it's fairly simple. We have to change the way students and we offer courses. If we don't do that, that's driving the budget every year, and we're gonna be frustrated every time we come to budget season. So that's my direction.
We're a board of education, a board of finance, and a board of education. We have the unique structure, and I don't think we take more advantage of it. We should take more advantage of that structure. We don't have that board of finance slapping our hands saying, you don't have the money for this. We control both pieces, and I think, again, I'm probably one of the junior people on this board. I don't think we spend enough time on education and talking about the quality of education. So that said, I do think as a board, we should discuss how much of those questions are we willing to answer now or before the budget. I personally have a view on all those things, and I also have a view on the other slides that the administration is considering, including rotating the classes. One of those views is, if we eliminate it now, why do we have to bring it back? Unless somebody tells us when they register the students that they have a new interest in it. To me, once you get it off the list, unless the demand goes up, then you don't have to add it back. That's a way not to have this cycle through, and then you can actually make those choices long-term. So, I think in fairness to, we don't want to just say, mandate this. Nobody wants to be the bad guy. But I think together, the administration and the board has to be able to answer these questions together. Whether we decide to fund it or not, that's a different story. But we should be able to talk about it in a public forum. But the reality is, nobody wants to be one to say, I'm going to cut Latin. Could be Latin, could be art, but at least there's a heuristic to be able to go through it. I would be remiss to think that, I don't think the administration would want to advance something to this board if they thought it was going to be to the detriment of the students. So I'm going to take this on faith that this is something that they're willing to evaluate, and they're not going to negatively impact our students. So I think we have an obligation to talk about together what we're willing to do and what we're not willing to do. As far as the 3-year view, Tom, I respect your comment on, go see some statistical information to get what the town is willing to fund. Scott already has it. We did a high-level 3-year view, the budget committee last year. Again, it's based on current contractual cost. That could be our starting point. That's a rough estimate. None of us should be held to it, because at the end of the day, the voters have to decide on the number. But at least we have a framework. But to spend the time, while I agree it's a good suggestion, we have limited resources, I don't know that, I think we have enough information there to be able to say, what's the framework over the next 3 years to be able to say what we can fund. Then, as a board and administration, we answer those questions and we say, okay, do we really want to put in a gating of 15? If there are no kids that want a course that under 15, do we want to cut it? I think the boards can say, well, let's do a range of 10 to 20, and then we reevaluate. If the administration says, well, but there's a certain circumstance to this, we want to, then we come back and reevaluate it. But I think we have to be able to start somewhere, and I think It shouldn't be about board goes first, administration goes first. We have to do this together.
Absolutely. The fixed cost drivers on a school system push the budget. We know this, 2.5% to 4%. You've got contractual obligations. So a teacher over a 10-year span of time becomes more and more expensive to you, times the number of teachers you have. We do have some data that we can build into models. The strategy becomes eat your young, right? As the 100% of the faculty's salary goes up by 2.5%, you cut X number of teachers to offset that forced increase. You can't do it anymore to buildings and grounds. You don't want to do it in other places. So you go into this phase where as the number goes down, you can take out staff. I think we all pretty much agree on that broadly. The qualitative question then comes into play. Remember when Wally King used to say, you're not Durg A, you're Durg A minus. Because we're supposed to be competitive with Westport, Darien, New Canaan, Wilton. I mean, the first question this board asks on any topic is, how does the rest of the Durg approach it? When we are at this end of that, and Darien and New Canaan can enjoy and do increases of multiple percent year after year after year. So if we do frame it very broadly, it's at what point can you take more staff out, and then they'll say, well, what kind of programming do you want to run? So I think this should be more back into subcommittee. I also am back to, these people are running a school. They don't have 16 hours a month to do this, and neither does Scott, because you're dividing him 3 ways. So I think that we can do this. It can be more quantified. It should be. It should look out 3-5 years. We do have parts of that underway. But I think it shouldn't be go off and come back to the board. I do think the administrative team and a couple of board members should be workshopping this, in committees.
Well, I also think as well, I agree with that, and I also think, again, are there questions you need answered from the board, like these up here, to help you think bold or to make bigger moves? I mean, wrote down, I have my answers to all these questions, right? I can give them to you right now, or I can sit on a committee and give them to you. If this is what's holding you back, or you're not sure, if we get rid of one section of wellness, we can make some bold moves. If you need an answer for that, then yeah, let's put somebody on a committee, have a discussion with you, and we'll get you an answer to that. I mean, we need to make some bolder moves. The little bit here, a little bit there is not going to get us there, and I agree. I mean, it's not taking people out every year as a straight decline, right? So we need to figure out how do we do it. If it's, setting some thresholds on classes, and you want to know what our direction is on that, we can give you the direction on that.
Yeah, and the administrators will say, yes, we can look forward, but we also are asking you to look backward. They're going to say, we've reduced this teaching staff by 8, whatever it was, positions, and I know because they tell me they think that a board doesn't credit that they have, giving up the dean was a pretty big give, and we accommodated it, and so what they see is, look, I'm showing you, as the number's going down, we're reducing staff. I think it's the cost that you need to save to keep your increment acceptable and the impact on program. So I do, yeah, and I agree with Cheryl. We do have some projecting that you can do, but none of us are, actuarials or accountants or forensic numbers people. So
Except Cheryl.
except, that's why I'm looking for, liaisons.
And again, I think the board is willing, I'm willing to weigh in on these questions as well. I do think that it should start with administration as what you feel on these, and then we'll give our opinion. But as far as moving things forward, so one of the major issues that we've discussed is this timing issue with student, 8th grade student course selections, right? And so we've talked about this for the last several years, that really we can't know because of the timing of when the students are making the course selections, and we can't do it any earlier because of this and whatever. Have we looked at, as an administration, a way to move up that selection process so that we can more accurately budget? That's a positive step. That's something you could say, okay, so every year we run into this challenge where we don't know the course selections by the time we're in the budget, so we're just kind of winging it and hoping. And every year the board says, well, can't we move up that timeline? And I don't even know what the answer is, but I guess I would say is, can we look at working with the middle schools to move up that timeline so that we don't run into this again? And that's a positive step that we can be taking that will move us in a direction that would be helpful.
Talking around this all night, but I guess,
Right.
what do we need to do to help, bridge the conversation here, get some of these questions answered? Do we need to send this back to a curriculum committee, budget
Well-
committee again? Do we need to put somebody in to help in some of the decisions that the administrators are?
Again, this was just a
How do we wanna-
presentation for what they had done over the summer as far as working towards this. The budget committee has been working on the projections, the curriculum
But
committee's
there are
been
some questions
working.
here, right, that they're asking.
Are they asking those questions, or are they just up, because we said, I think the way Gina said it is, so at some point in the future, we're going to need to make these decisions. If you're looking for
Yeah, we're not
the
asking you to
answers-
answer these
I'm
tonight.
asking
Well,
you to
We're-
answer
them right
there-
now.
That's what I'm saying,
There's,
We'll need them answered before budget season
That is
starts.
exactly
there's a
You guys need
decision, there's a
framework,
series of decision trees that we need the board, because if we say, okay, we've agreed, we're gonna get rid of Latin, next month, I'll have 45 people here telling you, you awful human beings, how could you take Latin away? And then we end up running Latin for what, 24 kids, 22 kids, whatever it is. So we need to say, if this, then that, and then the board goes this. I go, okay,
Correct.
if this, then that. So their homework assignment should be to generate this
Right. This and that lists.
branching
Right.
work. So this is where I want to just throw in my other metaphor for you. A friend that went out on a rowboat with his buddy, and they're trying to get from this end of the pond to the other, and he's pulling, and the boat isn't going anywhere because they hadn't pulled the anchor. So he gives a mighty heave, and the boat moves, and up from below the water comes just this gigantic pile of dead wood and everything that's down there has been pulled up. So you're frustrated, why aren't we moving this faster? Because we're pulling this boat. And then the whole history of how we do things, going back to 1960, pops up, and it says, you can't do course selection until the end of January. You go, why not? Just move it up, because it's nested in all kinds of things. You can't get the program of studies out until November. You don't have your report from Proud, like the reason it comes when it comes is that's how the cycle of the year works. And you're doing two other budgets also. I mean, we could think about, could you be not the third budget, but the second, to give you more time to deliberate, but then one of the other two has to,
Yeah, that doesn't, but, so, is your metaphor saying that we can't move that timeline, and so just,
No,
that's just
my
something,
metaphor is
because
saying,
that's the case, then
we find it
move
very
on.
frustrating when people go, how come it works this way? Why does it go 7-3-0? And you go, I don't know, in 2000, somebody made a decision. And we're so controlled in our field that we often are engaging with past ways we've done things. So it seems to me the two questions are, is it feasible to give the board more time on the other end of budgeting by getting the scheduling data earlier? And what are the sequence of questions that we really need board guidance on?
And I guess Todd and I are having a side meeting here. Does the board want the committees to deal with the questions and bring it back to the board, or do we want to just discuss this as a board?
Well, it's up to you how much redundancy you want, I mean, the committee did the whole weighted grading thing, and then we had a whole big discussion
that-
here,
that
and
went
we're
out
all
the
right
window
back,
again.
so it's like, I mean, we're all gonna have to make the decision at some point, and I think we can have, those discussions, it's just, like I say, administration just has to guide us and say, at a certain point when you say, okay, we're trying to move forward, and we need your guidance on these questions. And then, again, my expectation would be you would come with some, at least some, if not recommendations, some viewpoints on those questions. We'll debate them and have the discussion and make the decision, and then we can move forward. I think we're willing to, it's not, we want you to cut Latin, and so everybody comes after you. That's not, my viewpoint anyway. It's, what I really want to know is, we can offer this extra choice in English, or we can have freshman basketball, or we can have Latin with 4 kids in it, and what do we feel, and then we can have that discussion. It's easier than just saying, do you want Latin, do you want freshman basketball, or do you want this other choice? But I think we're always willing to have those discussions, and
Most of us
So,
are.
full board. Sounds good to
I don't
me.
know, can we vote on which metaphor we prefer?
No.
No,
No, we cannot. No, we
no, because
cannot.
you'll prompt him to say another one, to try and
No,
top
that's
that
fine.
one, and so.
abstain.
All I
we-
can think of is one of his predecessors had a Jeep, and look what happened to him. So, anyway.
I'm gonna get him one of those Matchbox Jeeps, so he has a Jeep. Okay, so, well, thank you. Okay, we will move on to policy. Now, there are 2 items on the agenda here. We have, item D is policy procedures and practices for the policy committee. This was based on an email discussion I had with Maureen, and also on, basically where we've, this dilemma we've been mired in for the last probably 7 to 8 years, which is, how do we get policies moved forward? And so, I'll initiate the discussion by saying that we have suggested approaching it in many different ways. We are no longer members of CABE. They want us to pay a large fee to become members again, to have them do our policies, and without pulling it up, it's like 16 grand or something like
I thought
that.
it was more in the 12 to 13 range based on what I was told, but
No, I think it's close to 60, but anyway. And then we also looked at having Shipman and Goodwin do it, which there's some sense to doing that, as there are legal counsel, to have their policies, especially when we call them to seek clarification on policies that aren't really even their policies. But the biggest challenge we have is that we're backlogged on policies, as is every school in Connecticut. Just, let's not kid ourselves, every school in Connecticut. If you go on the websites of Darien and New Canaan, there's policies from 1990. Everybody's, mired in that as well. And each year, the state comes out with new policies or mandate certain statutory language that we need a policy to cover. And so what happens is, they just kind of pile up and pile up and pile up, and as we try to go back and fix some of the older ones, the other ones are piling up, so it's really, it's like quicksand. So,
like whack-a-mole.
yeah, yeah. So where we are is a difficult spot. I think we can have a discussion as to, is there a better way to get there? I have suggested in the past, a holistic approach. We can take all of Shipman and Goodwin's policies online, and we can make our own new policy book. We can have policy committee members look at the old policies and the new ones to kind of see how they're different, but that's a daunting task, right?
It's an incredibly daunting task to try and track them.
Sure it
right?
is.
Historically, over what we have not, what's proposed. Sometimes there's an interim proposal. So you're often comparing and contrasting, not 2 sets of policies, but 2 or 3. That is a daunting task one by one.
Sure it is.
The other thing, and I'm relatively new to this, so I don't understand why the practice and procedure is such that we have 2 reads anyway, but that we have 2 reads keeps things log jammed in there. right?
Is that
Well-
similar to when we have our annual hearing, where Suzanne Crivet has to be invited to the meeting to say, hear ye, hear ye, hear ye, we are going to referendum? Like, we have the means to assist, to get this stuff out, so people have adequate time to read it if they care about it, and get it over with once, without doing this stuff over and over, because you don't have to go to the public library and check out the potential policy and read it in a book.
I think it's similar to our bylaws.
All about
and I
accessibility,
think,
but-
I would have to look it up to see, but I think statute kind of says that, and it's not as much for board members as it is for members of the public. That
Again.
you say, they come to a meeting and you say, we're changing the policy that no student can chew gum or whatever. I mean, they're
Well,
not
if it's
chewing
in
gum
our
now, but
bylaws-
whatever.
If
And
it's in our bylaws, Mike, and it's not a state statute, and I don't know the answer to that.
I can look it up, but I'm,
You are
It's-
not required, according to CABE, to have two readings.
Okay,
By statute, many or most boards do it by procedure,
so
to give the double look.
So if that's the
Right.
case, if it's not a statute and it's only our internal procedure, albeit one that's been back to time immemorial, it's gotta be one that's revisited, because it's cumbersome at best, at best. I mean, even these policies here that are being advanced, there are two of them. There's one on vaping and there's one on data protection that really need to go. They really need to be accepted. Some of the other ones, is there a downside to us having a specific policy on food service personnel and their code of conduct? I think we need one, but is it up there on my top 10 list? No. Not having student data privacy stuff approved the first go-around is problematic for me. That,
well, and I hear you, and I think we
not
should,
only is it problematic for me, it's also an exposure issue for me, right? That's where my background is. Those kind of policies and procedures we've got to get them through faster than doing it. And the 2 reads is slowing us down.
yeah, well, and I hear you. I can accept your argument. I do hear that. I will say, though, that we push policies through as fast as they come forward, and unless we get to a point where, like, this is what happened, this month was, I got an email for agenda item that there's all these policies for first and second reading we have to do, and so, I mean, I haven't even counted them, but there's so many policies on here that, how do we expect board members to get these policies on, Monday morning, and by Tuesday night have reviewed them all and looked at them to be able to vote on them for first
That's
or
another thing that's
second
slowing
reading?
us down then. I mean, at points in time, it's just gonna be incumbent upon people to suck
But-
up the last minute notice.
Or other boards use a consent agenda on a lot of stuff that they just go, we need you to approve it, it's part of the way the law works, and you go, okay, we approve it, and it moves forward.
Right, there's a more complete delegation of authority. I mean, I think that's what you're saying, Tom. There's a more complete delegation of authority. If it comes out of committee and we say we approve these policies, unless somebody digs down and says no, it doesn't become the topic for broad debate, like now.
Yeah, Jen and Julie, if you're,
You don't need our scintillating
totally
discussion.
enthralled
Interesting
with the
conversation,
conversation,
so
you can
we
stay,
knew,
but
we were compelled to
otherwise,
listen.
yes, feel free to go,
Please.
absolutely. Chris, you want, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, having a consent agenda, which I can't remember ever seeing here, but many other boards do it. And it is for the kind of stuff that sort of officially, formally, technically needs board approval, but which is clearly in the purview of the administration. But for legal reasons, like, accepting resignations or this and that and the other thing. I know how CES works, for instance. CES has a consent agenda, and it's all this kind of thing. And, maybe a limited or some prescription about a consent agenda that could contain policy matters, and board members are expected to, if they want to, read the policy, and if they want to pull one out and talk about it, they can. But in this big, long list, so that's one thing. I think if in fact we can legally dispense with 2 readings, you know, because what happened here, and it's understandable, is when I saw the second reading, I thought, where did those come from? I never saw those before. I had to go back and realize that we approved them for, in first reading in January.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and
But again, we approved them in January, then we had budget meetings
Yeah,
and all that
exactly.
stuff, so we
I
didn't, and they
understand
never
that they
came
got
back.
moved.
And so,
Back.
so,
They never
so
came
now
back.
we're logged in,
You know.
and third thing, and no one's gonna wanna do this, but, I'll just bring it up, is that, another thing to consider is rejoining CABE. I don't care if it's 12,000 or 16,000 or whatever it is, at least to consider it. I mean,
I would consider it at this point.
I felt it was just unbelievably chintzy weaselly at the time for us to have cut that out of the budget back in 2000 and whatever it was. But, you know, lost that battle.
Right.
But, you know, the argument that, hey, aren't we smart, we're getting a free ride off of Easton's membership,
Readings.
is like,
Easton's getting a free
Easton
ride,
had it for
too.
a while, I don't know.
Ultimately, it doesn't matter, right? It's about us getting the policies conformity with the law.
So, I mean, that's another alternative, but even then, if we're gonna rely on CABE or Shipman and Goodwin or.
Whoever,
Whoever,
an
you
entity
still
that
need-
we can agree on who we would
Yeah,
pay
or
to,
maybe
then we are gonna have to
Crowder's-
agree that we're gonna pay them every year to keep them
Crowder has some
current
spare
or
time between
something.
his projections, but-
Because otherwise it's gonna, we could pay $1 million to get our policies perfect
Well-
right now.
Right,
And
and
next
then-
year,
and you
we'd
could
be
do
in the
that.
same
And you
position
could say, and
unless we.
Chris said, don't be hunting for semicolons, because that's just not your.
I approve
No,
of
we-
the
we
hunting
go
for
there.
semicolons, Chris. If we only had one policy to read, I'd hunt for them too.
Right.
Yes.
No, well, and so we have to make a decision, because we go through, challenges all the time. So what is our role as board members? And everyone says, well, you're policy and oversight, you know, so now we're gonna be.
But we are
well,
policy and
But
oversight.
we are policy only if we, you know, read the policies.
But do you,
And
so
that's okay.
every member of
No,
the board should
no.
read every word of every
No,
policy?
no. So what I'm saying is that I'm okay, and have advocated for this many times. Chris wants to join CABE and pay, you know, whatever it is, 14, 16, 12, whatever $1,000 it is. But in essence, we paid the fee to Shipman and Goodwin, and for $1,000 a year, we can have their whole library of policies. And
Right,
so
so-
we could just say, if nobody really cares to look at every comma and see what's in them and how they fit in, we could just say, guess what? Here's our new policy book, the online one from Shipman and Goodwin, and here's our policy book, and we move forward, and there it is. If nobody cares what's in them or they're legally
not that
compliant,
Here's
move
why,
on.
here's why you can't do that, and I did try to pursue that. The online library is not camera-ready, any more than CABE is. They have written their policies as Chipman and Goodwin interprets it, and the one that I brought in as a sampler was gifts, bequests, and bequeaths, whatever, grants. And the Reading Board went through 4 revisions of it because it was so poorly written, including the line, the superintendent must accept donations in excess of $1,500. What they meant was, if the threshold was above 1,500, it had to come to my office. But what it said was,
You
I
have to
must
take
accept
everything.
it. So, which is
You
why
have
it
to do
took
it
them.
through G.
So they actually, went back to Shipman and said, what would it take for us to get into your policy, to get it adapted? And he goes, like, 30 grand. So, because we would put a junior lawyer on it for as long as it takes. The other thing to consider is how the CABE language permeates our handbooks, the K-8 system. I think you're better off sticking with the CABE language. The Shipman and Goodwin language isn't enumerated. They have a totally different presentational format. So I think it's more efficient to stick with the CABE language.
Okay.
I think we're on another, why is this happening to us more? Because many of the the K-12 boards, they have 2 sessions a month, right? They have the work session where they get through all the business of oversight and policy and stuff, and then they have the fun session of, tell us more about the program, and, well, we can't do that.
That's a good idea, Tom. Let's do that.
Yeah, let's add more meetings. That's right. So
Times 3.
I think you do need to come up with a, I think we need to get caught up. We get started on this, then the budget arrives, then all 3 budgets end up being, operating concurrently, and we start to get to these points where we go, well, gosh, the meetings are already 4 hours long. If we throw in policy, it'll be 4.5, let's wait. And then we get to, well, it's getting to be the end of the year, and then, well, we'll do it in the summer. So we know how the cycle doesn't work. You gotta make it work.
So we talked about having a meeting in the summer just on policy and stuff, and that never really.
Meeting
We
all
had one last
summer.
year.
I mean,
Oh,
we've
they've
had
been
several
meeting.
meetings this summer.
I
Like,
get it, I'm saying as a full board to kind
A
of
full board
pass.
for the purpose
pass-
of considering policy.
Yes. So what I'm hearing from Tom is that it's the viewpoint of the administration that the CABE-type policies align better with our existing language in our existing books, so you prefer to stay with CABE.
Yeah,
That's
I-
fine.
yep.
We've also figured out that even though it's CABE, like Shipman and Goodman, many times writes policies that might not be something that we would be happy with. Okay, so we also know that, this was something that I brought up a while ago, but so Dr. Cicchetti was here in what year?
10?
2010, okay? So we're talking about policies are 1990. I know for a fact there is a box at central office with policy books in it that we paid for in 2010 that was CABE's updating of the policy books. Here's your policy book, right? So do we want to take that from 2010? Does that
No.
help some of the others? No. Okay, so where we are then is that we're going to leave what we have in place, and it's just about these new policies and getting them through, right?
Dozens.
So how many new policies are there?
To get you up to
Not
date.
today. How many new policies are there that we need to get caught up?
I'm gonna say more than 60, less than 100.
Okay,
And
so
and
then,
it's also not just new policies, it's policies that haven't been revised since
Right.
1997.
I mean, it is a game, Mike, I think it's a game of whack-a-mole with these policies. And I said that over and over again, because you just get down with one and you feel like that one's popping up and rearing its head again. That,
I got that, yeah, no,
I think the whole idea of you either want to go with CAPE or you don't, but one way or another, we have to find a different way of thinking about this thing, right? And the way we think about this thing is to dig down almost to the level of writing it ourselves. Not quite, but almost. And I think we have to begin to think about this thing as a confirming view or a denying view, not a let's generate the view.
right, but I guess what I'm saying is, I don't know that it's the process that's slowing us down, it's the numbers. If you have 90 policies that are ready for first reading, then I'm gonna throw it at the board and say, send the 90 policies, and everybody has 30 days to look at the 90 policies and go through them. Now, I would assume, again, if we're gonna keep the structure and say that the policy committee has already reviewed the 90 policies, right? I'm assuming you're not just gonna say, we're gonna take whatever CABE says and put it through without looking at it. So if the policy committee has looked at the 90 policies, and you say these policies are ready, we'll send the 90 policies to the board. Chris will stay up late at night for 3 weeks and look through everything. We'll come back, we'll do first reading, everyone will be happy, we'll do second reading, and we move on, and we're done. I mean, then from there, we should be in a manageable position where we have 4 or 5, at a time. It's getting through the number. I don't know where the affirmation process would speed everything up, because the fact of the matter is the policy committee can't handle the number that's coming at them in the time frame. And so there's, none of what we've talked about is gonna alleviate that. Going to
I disagree
Cape,
with
going
you.
to
I agree with that,
Shipman
because
and
Chris
Goodman.
brought up the example of the second reading group, and he said he realized the last time we talked about it was in January. So that's
Right.
8 months where we couldn't get it on the agenda, so that is a
No,
process.
don't go there. It's not that it couldn't get on the
Well, there are
agenda.
too many things on the agenda, let's keep.
No,
moving.
it's, that's not even it's not even the case. What happens is this, when we do the agenda, the administration puts suggestions for topics on the agenda. Sometimes I put suggestions for topics on the agenda. The only time policies don't come forward is when they're not presented, you know? I never say, one time, if we're gonna do policies and we have a budget workshop, I would say to Tom, it's a budget workshop. Let's do the budget workshop and we'll do the policies at the monthly meeting. But I have never,
Yeah, so I'm back
you know,
to,
stopped
like
any
the third
policies. We'll
iteration
put 'em
tonight
right through.
of bandwidth, that it's a busy enough week when you've got all three, you know, 2 budget workshops and a board to say, and by the way, let's sneak along this. This is something that does get derailed in pretty much every board because other stuff. I don't know, we look at the agenda and we go, Gina, that's a 4-hour meeting. And we're gonna put another 30 minutes of policy in when you're tired and you wanna go wordsmith it. I think that, the other thing we're trying to do is make sure that the policies make sense K-12. So we can't just muscle through and leave the other 2 behind. In fact, Easton adopted the bylaws pretty much as written, so now I've got, you know, 2 different the Reading and the Region 9 bylaws are different now than the Easton bylaws, because they adopted the more recent version. It gets all mishmash. Is this the gifts, grants, and bequests is great. There's different dollar amounts for us in the different districts. So somebody says, I just got offered $750, can I accept that as the principal? I go, look it up, I don't know. If you must accept it. So we gotta, I do think you have to have a catch-up session. The 3 times a year, CABE says, this is what Hartford's up to. You know, this is what came out of the General Assembly, this is what came here. Some boards, here's my other theme for the night. We're not budgeting, we get frustrated, but we're not budgeting. But then when we want to budget, we go, well, if you need $2,000 or $10,000 or $20,000, that's a fifth of a teacher. Who are you going to cut, Gina? You know, so we probably should try to make this a focus for the year. This is the year of policy, and because you got to get caught up. There are 68 policies the feds say you must have. We do not have 30 of them. We don't even have a version of 30 of them. We're doing them, right? Like, we're not going to let elementary school teachers keep kids in from recess as a discipline. There's a policy, there's a statute that says you can't do it, but we don't have a policy yet. So our behaviors are out of front of our language. So
I mean, not to reframe this unnecessarily, but can we deal with the policies that are down for second read day and the policies that are down for first read?
the ones that are down for first read, you actually read, but you read them in the 17, 18, or the year, and then they
So they weren't even on the
language.
board.
So we feel like, no, you've read them and you moved them forward.
No,
But
they were not on the board then.
Right, so you need to.
So that's the, you
Right.
know, but again, so let's move forward. What I'm saying is that I hear that the
Here's a
structure
level
is
of frustration
delaying
with
things,
the
but
efficiency.
let's push these through. We'll push them through as fast as they come, and that's, you know.
I mean, again, if we don't necessarily need to have a second reading, we could probably all agree to, let's just do a first reading or some kind of consent thing to take care of that backlog, right? I think everybody's probably amenable to that.
Yep.
The front backlog, getting through the 90 and getting to make sure there's alignment between the other boards, you know, how do we help speed that up in the committee, right? If it's giving you CAVE access or more meetings, or how do we fix that piece? Because I think that's the more challenging piece.
I think we have to move towards the CAVE access. I do.
Okay. That's what
I don't know what-
everybody usually comes to when they're on the policy committee.
Okay. So then
You're not-
obviously it might
You're
not.
not really asking us things that
Right.
It might
haven't
not
all
be a
wrestled
statement that's
with.
said in a vacuum then.
I think that also my observation of the policy committee is that, you've got members of other boards who have simply just walked away because
Right.
it's too frustrating and too hard and they don't want
Yes,
to do it.
literally.
I didn't really know that was an option, but what I'm seeing is that it's putting an incredible burden on Maureen and on Chris.
It's
And-
not that big of a burden, but,
Well,
but there's gotta be a better way to
but-
approach this task. There just
Right, I
has
mean,
to
it's
be.
like, I know that, I'm sure that Cheryl does a lot of stuff on budget committee and stuff because of her expertise, and Mike and Paul have done a lot of stuff with facilities because of their expertise. I don't know if, and I don't even know if this is even your area of legal expertise or what.
It isn't, but
is it-
even if
so
it were,
I feel like-
bringing to bear those kinds of judgments that you have as a lawyer onto these policies is not my role here, right?
Right.
My role is to read these, see that they make sort of
Philosophical
cogent
sense, right.
right. They make philosophical sense, and that's it. It's not to invent them or say, hey, is this the best
The
practices
legally, right.
for the district? It's not that level of analysis, or I don't see it as such. If it's legally required, it's legally required. I don't even know that it's necessarily the role of the policy committee, once we get this stuff, to go through and compare it to statute. You could take that burden on, right? You could say, where's the originating statute, and does this language comply with that?
Right.
So let's
Well, this is
agree
what
to have a number of policies on every meeting until we get caught up. Just bring them forward.
If
push 'em
that's
through.
possible for them.
Yeah.
Give us
Look,
enough time
it
to
seems
look
that there's
through
a
it, but-
consensus to say, we'll dispense with true readings, and if there is, that begins to alleviate the backlog.
I
That'd be
move
good.
that we dispense
make a
with
motion.
2 readings until we
Catch up.
catch up.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a
Any
motion,
discussion?
motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention, I'll abstain. I'm with you guys in spirit, but like I said, I just think we can still do it the other way. Just, the issue is getting all the policies,
I did.
it was Coppinger and, so,
Now, with
Like I
respect
said-
to these policies.
There you go.
yeah, we can, let's, you've,
Chris, start reading.
no, so,
No semicolons?
So we ask these questions all the time, so, number one, on the policies presented for first reading, has the policy committee reviewed these policies, and are they recommending them to the board to be approved?
Aye, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. On the second reading, again, these were reviewed by us in January. Now, where it gets tricky when these things happen is because you never know whether, sometimes we read a policy and one of us has a question about one of aspect, and
The
we're gonna
social
go back
media
and
ones,
look at
I
it.
got
and
it.
So, but not belaboring this, the second readings also were reviewed by the policy committee, and they
Aye,
were
Mr.
reviewed by us as a board. So I'm hoping that everybody is comfortable with the fact that you did have a year to review these things. So unless you found something, in that time, I'm hoping those can be pushed through and that we can
So I make
approve for
I
first
make a
reading,
motion
the
that
other
we
ones, so.
approve all the policies presented today at this meeting. Would you like me to enumerate the numbers?
I think Chris can do that in the minutes,
First and second reading.
but
Correct.
First and second
Second
readings.
is the motion.
I think we have to do them separate. Do the first readings, and then
You
let's
just made
vote
a
on it, and then
motion
the
that
second.
we
Yeah, there's a motion on
dispense
the
with
floor.
this.
First and second read, so we don't need to
Yes,
do that
We
anymore.
don't need to do that anymore. We just
What-
made
what-
a
what-
motion that we
Yeah.
can dispense with the
Okay.
second readings.
Okay.
So they're all first readings, essentially.
Okay.
So we're basically treating that, because I gotta tell you, I looked at the second reading ones, I didn't even look at the first reading ones, because I assumed I'd get a second bite of the apple. However, I'm also willing to take it as essentially a consent agenda item, or treat it that way. But
It's-
I had no idea that it was gonna
fine.
It was going to be such a lively discussion.
Who knew?
You know, you reach a certain hour of the evening and things just get
So I
more lively.
motioned and you
I'll
second.
Debbie,
First
leave
and
it to
second.
me to fill in the numbers and all that stuff, unless you've got it in front of you. Do you have it?
How did this get on?
Oh, no, that's already passed.
That's been passed.
What is that?
Okay.
Now we're voting
But we're
on,
basically,
How did
now
they
we're
come
now
up?
we're
It
on
was-
item E.
I don't know.
That's odd.
E and F.
Oh, maybe I'm on your Apple TV, maybe.
Well, we're on E.
We're on E and F, we're
That
we're
was odd.
approving all the
All the
policies
enumerated
that are
policies
presented on the
dated
agenda
August
today.
20th.
And he's gonna fill in all the, item
Well,
numbers for
and
those.
do you have the agenda in front of you? You do. Okay, well, do the best you can. I'll just, but if there's any technicalities as to how they're described or labeled, I'll take a look at it, so, okay.
And I'll look up and see whether it's,
Correct, that was D. Okay. So,
I can send you the
so
reference.
now,
It was in the
what Paul is suggesting
summary
is
that
that
came out.
basically,
okay.
E and F.
E and F, we're approving
We approve
everything on E and F
oh, we
right
haven't
now.
voted yet.
Well, we're putting it up for
A motion.
approval.
We've already said we're all voting for it.
What was the motion?
To approve all the policies, first and second reading.
That are presented on
The agenda dated
August.
August 20th, 2019.
That was Carpenter.
Coppinger, Johnston.
Okay, any further discussion on the
Yes.
policies?
Yes, yes, I do. This is gonna happen. Can we accept that non-substantive typographical error type things can be brought to the appropriate person's attention
Sure,
after passage?
sure.
That would also save a lot of time, because then I can talk about my semicolons at my
For the
leisure.
fact.
I will,
But we're not gonna do
Amend
like
my
may
motion.
and should or things like that, right? We're just talking about commas and grammatical.
Yeah, I
things.
found a handful
You found,
of typos and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I did.
We
I'll amend my
frequently find
motion.
those.
Todd accepts the amendment.
I don't even think it's necessary, because the fact is that one of us read a policy that was approved 3 months ago, called it to somebody's attention and said, hey, wait a minute, there's a typo.
Just go
Then
change
you
it.
don't need board approval to,
got it. It's a Scrivener's error.
yeah, Scrivener's error, exactly, that's what it is.
Okay,
Aye.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? It's unanimous.
And we will try with all requisite swiftness to attack the remaining policies to bring them forward in a big bulk.
And I would also advise that, again, I know it's challenging for central office and everything, but send the policies to everybody whenever they're finished. Just send them to everybody, so everybody's has them. And that should speed up the process as well, because then, if we have issues or whatever, you can read them, and then we'll just
Got it?
make a commitment to push these through.
This is, Paul is passing.
Again?
Righty.
Hating now.
Oh, this is for everybody else.
7A.
We have these, don't we?
I am so hungry too. I'm so hungry. I came
You're
here-
hungry?
I didn't go home tonight. I came
Tina
here.
didn't put candy out,
Damn it.
nuts or anything tonight.
No chocolate covered pretzels?
Either that or Paul got in here before the rest of us and ate it all, but I'm not sure
Popcorn?
which it is.
Popcorn. Don't
Okay,
tempt
so
me.
we are on to item 7, which is Board of Education Committee reports.
Oh, I have a report. So the Fields and Facilities Committee met today, and what we discussed was a capital plan and revising it. And this is going to be a multi-meeting process. And, but one of the items that came up was that annually they do an inspection of all the asbestos-related items in the building. And 6 doors came up as compromised. So the doors, the locking mechanisms, the whole thing has to be removed and replaced, essentially. Because the items are, contain asbestos, they have to be wrapped, they have to be sent away. Then the replacements, because the locking mechanisms have to be replaced. It's a security item, so we have a particular vendor that we need to use for that. We're gonna have to waive the rule for the bid requirement rules. All right, so I have two motions, and I'll move them forward to the board. The Fields and Facility Committee recommends to the Region 9 Board to add a new item to the capital plan. and that
Approved
is
capital plan.
The approved capital plan. And that is to replace, the replacement of 6 interior doors at a cost of approximately $22,000. That's what we'll be putting into the capital plan. So that's the first item. So we're moving a new item onto the capital plan.
I'll second it.
Any questions on the issue? Okay.
You call the vote. Oh,
Uh,
I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I moved, Mike second. And then, because we now have a new item on the capital plan, what we need to do is authorize the use of those funds for it. So the next motion is that the FFC recommend that the Region 9 Board authorize the expenditure of up to $22,000 for the replacement of the 6 interior doors and waive the bid requirement rules due to the proprietary / security nature of the items.
Right,
And that
but
would be the door locks and handles. And so the same company will put it all in, and this includes installation as well as removal of the old doors.
so your motion is to move to approve,
Move.
not to recommend, because we're in the board now, so we're moving to approve
Prove that we authorize the
authorization of the expenditure not to exceed $22,000 for the replacement of the interior doors.
6 interior doors. And most of them are around the old.
And that we waive bidding requirements based on the proprietary,
I said that.
She said that.
did you say that in this one too? Okay.
So how did the FFC get comfortable with the cost of the 22?
Walter priced them out, and like I said, because of the nature of the doors, there's few people that you can go to for these items. It's an item that we need to get installed so that we can have a CO of the building for the opening of school as well.
The upper gym is well
So
ventilated
I
right now, but
I did
probably the file marshal would like us to be able to shut the
Yeah.
doors.
Pricing
Got
just-
it?
Right, and these new doors do not have asbestos
No,
in them.
no, but, right, so I just, Cheryl, I did review the proposal, and the charges for the hanging of the door align with what would be customary. They're well within line. And again, the hardware is proprietary, so that's where the main expense is for the type of locks and security devices that we have. That's, yeah.
And they do not contain asbestos.
I hope not.
Well, the locks do.
Yeah, the locks do, but nothing else. Okay, so,
Motion,
okay, is there any further discussion on,
did you second?
we did that already, didn't we? I thought,
No, we don't have a second for this.
oh, I'm sorry. There's a motion on the floor, is there a second? Todd has second, thank you, sir. Okay, is there any further discussion on the doors? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
So excited.
Okay, so,
Doors that open and close.
nothing else? Okay, are there any other reports from any other board committees that can be brief?
Yeah, building committee met the other day, covered all the items from it today. Budget and audit is to meet Friday, but there's some scheduling conflicts, so it may get moved, just.
Okay. Great, thank you for your work. Pension?
Yes, we had a pension committee meeting. Very briefly, the conversion from the administration of the defined contribution plan has gone very, very well.
You guys can leave.
And for the defined benefit plan, we are still rung ahead of benchmark for the entire number of assets under management. So nothing negative out of pension.
Okay,
Still doing
so we're still in good shape.
Yep.
Okay. Is there anything from policy?
We have addressed our concerns, the full board,
Okay,
so nothing further to report.
perfect. Okay, with that, is there any member of the public who would like to speak at this time? Seeing none. We will, now, can I have a motion to recess to executive session for the superintendent's evaluation and to invite Dr. McMorran?
So moved.
Second.
Yeah, I mean.
Okay, Maureen and Paul, you got that one? I'll write it down. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gina and
Deb,
Stephanie, thank you.
Deb doesn't need to stay.
Thank you. No, you can,
Chris will
unless you
Chris will
really
take
want to
notes.
stay and hang around for